Chapter 2131. The Supreme Sword Qi recorded the swordsmanship of the most ancient swordsmanship sect, the Shang Jianzong. The origin of the Supreme Sword Qi had always been controversial. Some said that it was a supreme sword treasure refined by the Shang Jianzong with the power of the entire sect at its peak. Therefore, the swordsmanship recorded in it was the Shang Jianzong's swordsmanship. However, there were also other theories. It was said that the Shang Jianzong finally established the sect after obtaining the Supreme Sword Qi and comprehending the swordsmanship in it. In all the records, the Shang Jianzong was the first swordsmanship sect. There were also various records about the origin of the swordsmanship. One of them was that the Supreme Sword Qi was a supreme treasure condensed by heaven and earth. It recorded the swordsmanship and was obtained by the ancestor of the Shang Jianzong. He comprehended the swordsmanship in it and finally established the Shang Jianzong with the help of the swordsmanship in the Supreme Sword Qi. Chu Fengmian was not clear about these two theories. The first theory was more widespread. But now, as Chu Fengmian obtained more and more Supreme Sword Qi, he became more and more aware of the mystery of the Supreme Sword Qi. This mystery did not seem to be something that could be created by humans. However, all of this was just Chu Fengmian's speculation. If he wanted to solve this mystery, he would have to obtain all 3,000 Supreme Sword Qi. Only then would he have a chance to solve the mystery of the Supreme Sword Qi. Time passed by little. In front of Chu Fengmian, the ancient swordsmanship book appeared. On the new pages, there were already swordsmanship recorded. Chu Fengmian had comprehended the swordsmanship in the 1,115 Supreme Sword Qi. He had comprehended the mystery of the swordsmanship and integrated it into the 9 regions swordsmanship, becoming a part of it. Chu Fengmian's realm did not change at all. However, the integration of the swordsmanship made Chu Fengmian's aura increase dramatically. The sword intent behind Chu Fengmian even soared to the sky. If this was not the Sword Emperor Palace, perhaps the entire Sword Dao sect and the entire 9 regions would be able to see this shocking sword intent. This time, Chu Fengmian did not only comprehend the swordsmanship in the 1,115 Supreme Sword Qi, but also the swordsmanship of Tiansheng Jiandi. Tiansheng Jiandi practiced the sacred sword art, an extremely ancient swordsmanship. There were thousands of swordsmanship and unique swordsmanship everywhere. However, the sacred sword art could be regarded as the most unique among the countless unique swordsmanship. When Chu Fengmian fought with the Heavenly Saint Sword Emperor, he had observed the battle between the Heavenly Saint Sword Emperor and the Supreme Sword Formation and discovered some of its secrets. Otherwise, Chu Fengmian might have been tricked by the Heavenly Saint Sword Emperor's sacred sword technique. Although the sacred sword art could only be regarded as an unorthodox swordsmanship, it still had its own uniqueness. Chu Fengmian's 9 regions swordsmanship was a kind of swordsmanship created by integrating all the swordsmanship in the world. The integration of the sacred sword art into the ancient swordsmanship book was no less beneficial to Chu Fengmian than the integration of the Supreme Sword Qi. He continued to comprehend the swordsmanship for a full 10 days. During these 10 days, Chu Fengmian stayed in the Sword Emperor Palace without moving. All his energy was focused on comprehending the swordsmanship. Many of the swordsmanship recorded in the 9 regions swordsmanship had been comprehended by Chu Fengmian when he was still weak. Now that Chu Fengmian's strength was getting stronger, he comprehended some of the different mysteries of these swordsmanship again. Chu Fengmian carefully organized the swordsmanship in the book. Suddenly, a swordsmanship appeared in Chu Fengmian's mind. This swordsmanship inadvertently appeared in Chu Fengmian's mind. It was a kind of swordsmanship that was born by integrating the strengths of countless swordsmanship recorded in the ancient swordsmanship books. Chu Fengmian practiced this swordsmanship over and over again in his mind. After practicing it over and over again, Chu Fengmian finally opened his eyes. The ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword appeared in Chu Fengmian's hand. Chu Fengmian held the spiritual sword and suddenly slashed out. The might of this sword seemed to be able to split the heavens and earth. The boundless violent power swept through everything. The entire Sword Emperor Palace was shaking. The surrounding space was already enveloped by the life seal, guarding this place firmly. However, it was about to shatter under the might of this sword. This was the result of Chu Fengmian trying his best to suppress the might of this sword. Otherwise, the life seal wouldn't be able to withstand the true power of this sword and would be blasted away. As for the Sword Emperor Palace, it wouldn't be able to withstand the sharpness of this sword. The might of this sword could be said to be able to split the heavens and earth. This is the first sword of the 9 regions swordsmanship. The initial sword shall be called Sky Splitter. Chu Fengmian looked at the sword in front of him and was very satisfied. He created the 9 regions swordsmanship and the ancient book of sword principle. He had integrated countless sword techniques into it, all for this day to create his own sword technique. Sky Splitter was the first sword of the 9 regions swordsmanship. In fact, for Chu Fengmian, with his current strength, creating a sword technique wasn't difficult at all. The Emperor realm, even the quasi-emperors, the life and death steps, all had the ability to create martial skills. However, what they created could at most be regarded as martial skills, not immortal skills. Chu Fengmian hadn't created his own sword technique because he was waiting for the moment when he was strong enough to complete the ancient book of sword principle. Today, as Chu Fengmian's sword principle improved further, he finally reached this step. Although he had only created the first sword technique, Chu Fengmian knew that the power of this Sky Splitter was definitely more powerful than the first 5 moves of the 9 profound immortal skill. It was even comparable to the 6th move. Even the first 2 moves of the first sword technique, the 3 Sun Blazing Flame Sword and the 4 Hurricane Sword, were not as powerful as this Sky Splitter. This sword technique was definitely an immortal skill. Even among the countless sword techniques of the immortal skill level, it was ranked as a top-grade sword technique. Boy, I thought you could only do this when you reached the celestial realm. I didn't expect you to create such a terrifying sword technique at the half-step celestial realm. The moment Chu Fengmian performed Sky Splitter, even Xing Xian was awakened. When he saw the complete sword technique, his eyes revealed a bit of shock. If the sword technique you created can be completed in the end, I'm afraid it's qualified to be ranked among the 10 supreme immortal skills of the ancient times. Xing Xian's words were incomparably shocking, but he also knew that there was no exaggeration in his words. He came from an incomparably ancient era and didn't know how many powerful immortal skills he had seen. He had seen the 10 supreme immortal skills of the ancient times. But now, the sword technique created by Chu Fengmian, Sky Splitter, still shocked him. Chapter 2132. Of course, the power of the 10 supreme ancient immortal techniques was not limited to this. However, the Sky Splitter that Chu Fengmian created was only the first move of the 9-realm sword art. Next, Chu Fengmian would create the 2nd and 3rd moves. If the 9-realm sword art could be completed, its future might not necessarily be inferior to the 10 supreme immortal arts of the ancient era. It's difficult. I can barely create the first move now. As for the 2nd move, I have no clue. Chu Fengmian shook his head when he heard Xing Xian's words. This was the first move of the 9 regions sword principle. He had comprehended and created it after comprehending countless sword principles. Chu Fengmian had no clue about the next few moves. It's rare to be able to create such a powerful sword art in the half-step celestial realm. Xing Xian said after hearing Chu Fengmian's words. Even the first sword emperor created the first move of the first sword technique, the 3 Suns Blazing Sword technique, after he stepped into the celestial realm. Your first step is already ahead of the number 1 sword emperor, surpassing an immortal emperor. The number 1 sword emperor was one of the most heaven-defying sword cultivators since ancient times. He was known as the number 1. After becoming an immortal emperor, he created one of the 10 supreme heavenly sword arts. There was no need to doubt his monstrous talent. However, he had already stepped into the celestial realm when he created the first sword art. When Chu Fengmian created the move, he was only in the half-step celestial realm. It could be said that Chu Fengmian had surpassed the first sword emperor of his generation. Not enough, not enough. Chu Fengmian shook his head. Of course, he knew that it was extremely dazzling to be able to surpass the first sword emperor of his generation. However, Chu Fengmian knew very well that his master, the Lord of Sword Dao, was a supreme sovereign. His attainments in Sword Dao had even surpassed the #1 Sword Emperor. He had become a supreme sovereign, the Lord of Sword Dao. However, even the master of Sword Dao died under the siege of Tianzhou regions. Chu Fengmian was far from surpassing the first Sword Emperor. In order to avenge the master of Sword Dao, Chu Fengmian had to surpass the master of Sword Dao. If you want to improve your swordsmanship, the best way is to go to the 3 Great Holy Realms or Tianzhou domain. Xing Xian was also aware of Chu Fengmian's past. Seeing Chu Fengmian's expression, he spoke. All sword arts, martial skills, and immortal arts originated from the 4 great sacred realms. If you want more sword arts, you'll have to go to the 4 great sacred realms to have a chance. I know. Chu Fengmian nodded. He also knew that if he wanted to improve his strength further, it might not be useful for him to stay in the 9 domains. Sooner or later, Chu Fengmian would have to go to the 4 domains. Chu Fengmian still couldn't find any trace of the mysterious Tianzhou regions. Even if he wanted to go, there was no way. However, Chu Fengmian had already learned a lot about the other 3 sacred realms. Chu Fengmian killed Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tianqing Jinni. Not only did he obtain their treasures, but he also obtained their memories. The 2 immortal generals were experts who had been famous for a long time. In their memories, they knew a lot about the 3 Great Holy Realms. They even recorded the way to go to the 3 Great Holy Realms. After Chu Fengmian finished his business in the 9 domains, he could set off for the 3 Great Holy Realms. The 3 Great Holy Realms were the real vast world with countless experts and countless treasures. It was the place where the real experts should go. Although the 9 domains had countless treasures and experts, it was far from being comparable to the 3 Great Holy Realms. The mysterious Tianzhou regions behind the 9 domains was the real existence that could be compared to the 3 Great Holy Realms. Sword formation rise. Chu Fengmian stood up. Suddenly, a burst of sword intent burst out. 2,815 Supreme Sword Qi suddenly flew out and surrounded Chu Fengmian, forming a Supreme Sword formation. The Supreme Sword Qi exerted its greatest power by combining together to form a Supreme Sword formation. The Supreme Sword formation was born from the Supreme Sword Qi. It could be said that it was tailor-made for the Supreme Sword Qi. It was known as the first killing formation. Other spiritual swords could also form a Supreme Sword formation. However, only the Supreme Sword Qi could exert the terrifying power of the Supreme Sword formation. Previously, when Chu Fengmian had 1,800 Supreme Sword Qi in his hand, it was already enough to form a Supreme Sword formation. This time, Chu Fengmian had more than 1,000 Supreme Sword Qi in his hand. He could form a more perfect Supreme Sword formation. As Chu Fengmian poured his power into it, all the Supreme Sword Qi returned to form a Supreme Sword formation in an instant. The Supreme Sword formation that was formed this time was countless times more powerful than the previous one. Chu Fengmian felt that if he was trapped in this Supreme Sword formation now, it would be difficult for him to escape. Chu Fengmian's strength definitely surpassed most of the immortal generals. Even Chu Fengmian admitted that it would be difficult for him to escape. For some of the weaker immortal generals, once they were trapped in this Supreme Sword formation, they might die on the spot. This was the tyrannical power of the Supreme Sword Qi. The sword formation formed was enough to kill immortal generals. Moreover, this Supreme Sword formation could only be considered as a half-finished product now. Chu Fengmian looked over and sized it up carefully. He could see that there was still a part of the formation I'm missing from this Supreme Sword formation. This part of the formation, I was the missing 185 strands of Supreme Sword Qi. The Supreme Sword formation, formed by 3,000 Supreme Sword Qi, was the most complete. The one that Chu Fengmian had formed now was still incomplete. However, even if it was incomplete, its power was enough to kill immortal generals. It's a pity that I have a total of 2,815 Supreme Sword Qi, but I didn't get the King's Sword Qi. I wonder where the King's Sword Qi is. If I can get the King's Sword Qi, the power of this Supreme Sword formation can be increased several times. Chu Fengmian looked at the Supreme Sword formation in front of him and muttered to himself. Supreme Sword Chi, a total of 3,000. This was something that everyone knew. However, what many people did not know was that within the Supreme Sword Chi, in addition to the 2,999 Sword Chi, there was also a King Sword Chi. This King Sword Chi was the core of the Supreme Sword Chi. It was also the true core of the Supreme Sword Formation. The Supreme Sword Formation that Chu Fengmian had formed now lacked this core. If Chu Fengmian could get the King Sword Chi, the power of this Supreme Sword Formation would be even more terrifying. First, set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Remember, Bookhouse. Chapter 2133. This Monarch Sword Chi is not in the 9 regions. I don't know where it went, but I now control 2,815 Supreme Sword Chi. I will encounter the other Supreme Sword Chi sooner or later. Supreme Sword Chi had the ability to attract each other. Chu Fengmian now had so many Supreme Sword Chi in his hands. The remaining Supreme Sword Chi would also be attracted to Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian was not in a hurry to find them. I have spent 10 days in seclusion this time. Chu Fengmian slowly stood up and withdrew his power. The 2,815 Supreme Sword Chi had all entered Chu Fengmian's body. He calculated the time and found that 10 days had passed. Since Elder Fan did not look for him in these 10 days, it proved that nothing major had happened in the Sword Dao sect. The people of the 100 Territories Alliance did not find out that it was Chu Fengmian who killed Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tianxing Jindi. Chu Fengmian deliberately made a move in the returning ruin sky. First, he wanted to use the power of the chaotic ruins to weaken the two. Second, it was because the returning ruined sky was an incomparably unique region among the 9 regions. Inside, one would be blocked by an invisible force when trying to divine others, making it extremely difficult to do so. Therefore, even if the people of the 100 Territories Alliance knew that Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tianxing Jindi had died, they might not be able to find out about Chu Fengmian. It's time to take a look at the empty rings of Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tianxing Jindi. 2 empty rings suddenly appeared in Chu Fengmian's palm. They were the empty rings of Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tianxing Jindi. Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tianxing Jindi were both immortal generals and the higher-ups of the 100 Territories Alliance, who knew how many treasures they had obtained in the 9 regions. Chu Fengmian had only taken a quick look before leaving the returning ruins sky in a hurry. Now that the cultivation was over, it was time to count the gains this time. Chu Fengmian's mind moved. A stream of spiritual power was injected into the empty ring from his fingertip. He opened the empty ring. Suddenly, a 7-colored light was emitted. At a glance, almost every treasure in the empty ring was a supreme treasure. Sage pills, sage medicines, immortal artifacts, and various wondrous items were all over the place. Any one of these items could make many experts in the celestial realm fight for it madly. However, this was normal. Old Ancestor Gui Wu and Tianxing Jindi were both immortal generals. Ordinary treasures were not worthy of their attention. Only treasures that were useful to celestial realm warriors would be kept in their empty rings. Of course, among the countless treasures, Chu Fengmian was most concerned about the immortal stones. To him, the immortal stones were the most important things. Chu Fengmian needed a large amount of immortal energy to accumulate strength. He could only obtain it by devouring the immortal stones. A total of 17,000. Chu Fengmian quickly counted the number of immortal stones in the ring. The total number of immortal stones in Tianxing Jindi's empty ring was 17,000. This number was neither too much nor too little. Now, Chu Fengmian had about 25,000 immortal stones left from the Dark Whale hidden treasure. In addition to the immortal stones from Long Wuxian and the South Dragon Emperor, Chu Fengmian had around 30,000 immortal stones in total. In addition to the 17,000 immortal stones, Chu Fengmian now had around 47,000 immortal stones. This was an unattainable number for any immortal general. An immortal stone was priceless in the hands of a celestial realm warrior. There were only a few immortal generals who could have more than 10,000 immortal stones, unless they had a shocking background. Now, the 47,000 immortal stones in Chu Fengmian's hands were absolutely a fortune. It's still too little. Chu Fengmian sighed and shook his head. With so many immortal stones, it was enough to support dozens of half-step celestial realm warriors and demon gods to break through the celestial tribulation. But for Chu Fengmian, it was far from enough. Previously, Chu Fengmian had devoured Tiansheng Jiandi's blood essence, which was equivalent to the immortal power contained in 100,000 immortal stones. That was how Chu Fengmian's strength had improved further. If he wanted to accumulate enough strength to break through the celestial tribulation, he would have to devour 1,000,000 immortal stones in one go. 1,000,000 immortal stones was an astronomical number that was out of reach. The other way was to hunt other immortal generals and devour their blood essence, which was also extremely difficult. Immortal generals were people who had obtained countless opportunities and great fortune. They had their own trump cards and means. It was extremely difficult to kill an immortal general. Chu Fengmian was able to kill Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tiansheng Jindi because he had carefully planned a trap and lured them into it. As for the other immortal generals, this move might not work because Chu Fengmian was able to kill Martial Ghost Old Ancestor and Heavenly Saint Sword Emperor. The most important thing was that he had found their weaknesses. It was Prince Xia and his boundless sword Qi. Chu Fengmian first captured Prince Xia and lured them into the returning ruins. Then, he used his boundless sword Qi to lure them into the ruins of chaos, where he trapped them and used the power of the ruins of chaos to weaken their strength. The right time, the right place, and the right people were indispensable. Although Chu Fengmian had the idea to hunt other immortal generals, he also knew that it was extremely difficult. If he wanted to break through to the celestial realm quickly, he would have to come across some amazing opportunities. Opportunities? By the way, what about that ancient map? Chu Fengmian suddenly recalled that he had obtained an ancient map from Prince Xia. It recorded a void coordinate, which was the entrance to the small world where Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tiansheng Jindi had taken place. That map was obviously a fragment, and there was another part of it. Chu Fengmian searched carefully. Sure enough, he found a similar ancient map in a Martial Ghost Patriarch's spatial ring. The moment the two ancient maps were taken out, they fused together to form a complete map. Chu Fengmian looked over and found that this map didn't only have one entrance. It even depicted a part of the situation inside the small world. Is there a sect inside? Chu Fengmian carefully looked at the image on the map. According to the description, this small world should be a sect. It could be said that it was a sect map, but the records in it were extremely vague, making it impossible to see the situation inside. It was extremely mysterious. It was no wonder that Martial Ghost Ancestor and Tiansheng Jindi didn't dare to rashly go after obtaining this ancient map. There was something strange about it everywhere. The Sword Execution Order map? How'd you get this thing? While Chu Fengmian was observing, Xing Xian came over and suddenly recognized the origin of this ancient map. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, book guest residence. Chapter 2134. Upper Sword Enforcer Token. Chu Fengmian's expression changed slightly when he heard that name. He was no stranger to that name. It was a name that had been mentioned in countless ancient books. The Upper Sword Enforcer Token was the most valuable treasure of the Upper Sword sect. There were only 12 Upper Sword Enforcer tokens in the entire Upper Sword sect. Although it was called a most valuable treasure, it was actually a symbol of status. The Upper Sword Enforcer token did not have any power on its own. It was just that the materials used to refine it were unique. It was incomparably tough and indestructible. In reality, it was not even a spiritual artifact. However, the Upper Sword Enforcer token was worthy of being called a most valuable treasure because of one meaning. It was even more valuable than an immortal artifact. That was because the Upper Sword Enforcer token represented the identity of the Upper Sword sect's Holy Son. The Holy Son of the Upper Sword sect was equivalent to the core disciples of some sections. They had the qualifications to compete for the position of sect master. Unlike other sects, where disciples were promoted step by step the holy son of the Upper Sword sect relied on the Upper Sword Enforcer token. The person who obtained the Upper Sword Enforcer token was the holy son of the Upper Sword sect. Even the Upper Sword sect recognized this identity. Even if it was a disciple of other sects, or even a demon, or even an ordinary person, as long as they held the Upper Sword Enforcer token, they could become the holy son of the Upper Sword sect. They had the qualifications to compete for the position of sect master. The Upper Sword sect was a giant in that era. It was the strongest sect in the 9 regions. It was the first sword sect that created the Sword Tao of the future. The status of the Upper Sword sect's sect master was extremely honorable. It was not just a sect master. It could even become the overlord of the 9 regions and control a large sect. More importantly, whoever obtained the position of the Upper Sword sect's sect master would be able to obtain the Upper Sword sect's most ancient inheritance. The Upper Sword sect's most ancient inheritance and most profound sword technique was Devour. Only the successive Upper Sword sect masters had the qualifications to learn it. The strength of this sword technique made every Upper Sword sect master an invincible expert of that era. No one could challenge him. Because of this, the competition for each Upper Sword Enforcer token was incomparably intense. Many experts fought with their lives on the line for a single Sword Enforcer token. In that incomparably ancient era, the appearance of the Upper Sword Execution Order chart was enough to cause a storm of blood. The Upper Sword sect has been destroyed for tens of millions of years. The Upper Sword Execution Order chart disappeared along with the destruction of the Upper Sword sect. Why would it suddenly appear at this time? Chu Fumian looked at the ancient map in his hand with surprise. Since this ancient map was the Upper Sword sect's execution map, then the coordinates and the entrance were the Upper Sword sect's entrance. Was this the location of the Shang Sword sect? As the first sword principal sect recorded in the world, the ruins of the Upper Sword sect were something that countless sword cultivators would frantically search for. The most secretive, unparalleled sword technique of the Upper Sword sect was something that countless sword cultivators yearned for even in their dreams. Many of Chu Fengmian's senior brothers and sisters had once sneaked into the void to search for the ruins of the Shang Sword sect, but to no avail. Today, Japan's Supreme Sword sect is going to appear. The appearance of the Upper Sword Execution Order chart was definitely not a coincidence, especially since Chu Fengmian had obtained Tiansheng Jindi's memories. He also knew the origin of the Upper Sword Execution Order chart. The Upper Sword Execution Order chart was not found by Tiansheng Jindi in the ruins, but it suddenly flew from the void. It seemed to have chosen Tiansheng Jindi and fell into Tiansheng Jindi's hands. This was definitely not a coincidence. The Upper Sword sect was a colossus. It was said that there was more than one sect master who had stepped into the immortal emperor realm. If there was really some kind of scheme left behind, it was not impossible for it to have been left behind for tens of millions of years. But the Upper Sword sect has been destroyed. The Upper Sword sect that still exists now is nothing but ruins. Could it be that the Upper Sword Execution Order chart has appeared to compete for the position of Sect Master of the Upper Sword sect? But what's the use of the position of Sect Master? Chu Fumian frowned. In that incomparably ancient era, the position of Sect Master of the Upper Sword sect represented hegemony and the authority to control the entire 9 regions. It was an invincible might. But now, the Upper Sword sect had been destroyed. Even if some things were left behind, they were only ruins. Even if someone became the sect master of the Upper Sword sect now, they would only get an empty shell. But the Upper Sword Execution Order chart suddenly flew out of the void and chose Tiansheng Jindi. This was definitely not a coincidence. This was because in Tiansheng Jindi's memories, he was not the only one who had obtained the Upper Sword Execution Order chart. There was another powerful sword cultivator, the Heaven-Breaking Sword Venerable, who also obtained the same Upper Sword Execution Order chart. Obviously, the Upper Sword Execution Order chart had taken the initiative to choose other sword cultivators. The sudden appearance of the Upper Sword Execution Order chart must have a purpose. Inheritance? Chu Fumian frowned. Suddenly, he thought of something. The inheritance of the Upper Sword sect. The Upper Sword sect had been destroyed in the ancient era. However, the ruins of the Upper Sword sect together with the inheritance, disappeared almost at the same time. The entire upper sword sect seemed to have been erased by an era. Apart from the records in the ancient books and the supreme sword chi, all other traces of the upper sword sect had disappeared. The inheritance of the upper sword sect had also disappeared. Logically speaking, even if a sect was destroyed, the inheritance in it would be very easy for it to survive. Just like the Yun-Yu Heavenly Palace, even if it was destroyed, the inheritance still remained, waiting for the successor. The Upper Sword sect was a sect tens of thousands of times more powerful than the Yun-Yu Heavenly Palace. If the Yun-Yu Heavenly Palace could leave behind its inheritance, there was no reason why the Upper Sword sect was not qualified to leave behind its inheritance. Coupled with the sudden appearance of the Upper Sword Execution Order chart, it was possible that the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect was about to be born. The sudden appearance of the Upper Sword Execution Order chart was to choose the successor. Therefore, the people who obtained the Upper Sword Execution Order chart were all sword cultivators. However, it seemed that Tian Xingjindi did not realize that the ancient chart was the Upper Sword Execution Order chart. He just took it as a map of an ordinary small world. After all, the Heavenly Saint Sword Emperor wasn't from the Nine Domains. His understanding of the Nine Domains was far less than Chu Fengmian's. Furthermore, even Chu Fengmian couldn't tell at first glance that this ancient diagram was the Upper Sword Execution diagram. It was only after Xing Xian's reminder that he realized all this. The inheritance of the Upper Sword sect is about to be born. Something big is going to happen. Chu Fengmian said softly. There were no coincidences in the world. The inheritance of the Upper Sword sect could disappear for millions of years. However, it suddenly appeared at this moment. It was definitely not a coincidence. There was something hidden in it. The upheaval of the Nine Domains this time was probably not as simple as the Nine Domains of Heaven being about to be born. Chapter 2135. If this Upper Sword Enforcer token chart is related to the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect, then it will be a great opportunity for me. Chu Fengmian's eyes were very serious. He knew very well what the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect represented. The unparalleled sword technique of the Upper Sword sect was the most ancient and mysterious sword technique. Regardless of whether Chu Fengmian comprehended it, integrated it into the 9 regions swordsmanship, or mastered it, it would greatly enhance Chu Fengmian's strength. The sword cultivators selected by the Upper Sword Enforcer token chart this time are Tian Xingjindi and Heaven-Breaking Sword Venerate. They are both immortal generals. I wonder if there are any mysterious sky realm experts among them. Chu Fengmian muttered to himself. Heaven-Breaking Sword Venerate, another sword cultivator in the 100 Ultimate Star Region Alliance, who had also obtained the Upper Sword Enforcer token chart, was also an immortal generals. He cultivated the Heaven-Breaking Sword technique, which was the sword technique of an extremely ancient sect called the Heaven-Breaking Tianjian sect. The Heaven-Breaking Sword technique was one of the most powerful immortal techniques. In terms of strength, Heaven-Breaking Sword Venerate wasn't any weaker than Tian Xingjindi. He would also become one of the strongest opponents in the competition for the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect. However, there were a total of 12 Upper Sword Enforcer tokens in the Upper Sword sect. Chu Fengmian only knew about the one in his possession and the one in Heaven-Breaking Sword Venerate's possession. Chu Fengmian had no idea whether the other 10 tokens had yet to be discovered or had fallen into the hands of others. If the Upper Sword Enforcer token chart was really related to the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect, then anyone else who obtained it would be Chu Fengmian's opponent and enemy. Let's talk about this after the Upper Sword Enforcer token chart recognizes me as its master. Chu Fengmian's mind stirred as a wave of sword intent condensed in his palm and enveloped the Upper Sword Enforcer token chart. The Upper Sword Execution Order illustration was actually a spiritual weapon. It could recognize a master, but the method was different from ordinary spiritual weapons. It was similar to the Supreme Sword Chi. Only the Supreme Sword Intent could subdue it and make it recognize a master. As the Sword Intent enveloped the Upper Sword Executor chart, ancient vein patterns appeared. Chu Fengmian could tell that these ancient vein patterns were unique to the Upper Sword sect. More and more vein patterns appeared. Eventually, they turned into a sword light and flew into Chu Fengmian's forehead. Countless memories immediately appeared in Chu Fengmian's mind. These memories were all related to the sword sect. In the memories, Chu Fengmian saw that the most important thing was a pregnancy. December 5th, Chu Fengmian muttered to himself. The opening of the Upper Sword Sect ruins was on the 5th of December. It was no wonder that Tianshang Jindi and the martial ghost patriarch didn't enter the ruins. The two of them had obtained the Upper Sword Executor chart, but hadn't made it recognize a master. Naturally, I didn't know about this. Today was the first day of the 12th lunar month. In another 4 days, the Shang Sword Sect ruins would be opened. There are still 4 days left. I can make some preparations. Just as Chu Fengmian was observing the countless memories that had entered his mind, a shocking sword intent suddenly erupted from behind him. This shocking sword intent wasn't under Chu Fengmian's control at all. It soared into the sky. The entire sword sovereign palace couldn't resist this sword intent as it soared into the sky. In the depths of the void, even the 9 domains and the endless starry sky seemed to be able to clearly sense this sword intent. Although this sword intent only existed for an instant, it dissipated immediately after. However, all the martial artists and Yao gods in the 9 domains, and even those outside the 9 domains, knew that the Upper Sword Executor chart had fallen into Chu Fengmian's hands. Not good. The Upper Sword Executor chart has exposed my identity? Chu Fengmian's expression changed abruptly. The eruption of this sword intent had instantly exposed Chu Fengmian's identity. The fact that the Upper Sword Executor chart had fallen into Chu Fengmian's hands was also exposed. Is this the Upper Sword Sect's test? Chu Fengmian's eyes were incomparably cold. The Upper Sword Sect had released the Upper Sword Executor chart to let the experts of the 9 domains compete with each other. In the Upper Sword Sect's view, only the true peak experts were qualified to compete for the inheritance of the Upper Sword Sect. Therefore, once someone obtained the Upper Sword Executor chart and made it recognize him as its master, their identity would be exposed and others would come to compete for it. It seems like I can't hide it any longer. However, I must obtain the inheritance of the Upper Sword Sect. Whoever dares to snatch it will only have a path of death. Murderous intent surged in Chu Fengmian's eyes. He was determined to obtain the inheritance of the Upper Sword Sect. Whoever dared to compete for the Upper Sword Executor chart would be Chu Fengmian's mortal enemy. Let's go. Since he couldn't hide it any longer, Chu Fengmian didn't stay in the Sword Sovereign Palace any longer. He immediately went to the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. In the Origin Sword world, many disciples of the Sword Dao sect had seen the soaring sword intent just now. They could tell that the sword intent had come from the depths of the Origin Sword world. For a moment, there was a flurry of discussion. In the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace, Lord Slayer, He Luo, and the others were all chatting. At this moment, Chu Fengmian suddenly appeared and stepped into the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. Sect Master. Greetings, Sect Master. Seeing Chu Fengmian's arrival, several disciples of the Sword Dao sect who were guarding the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace bowed and greeted him. Sect Master. Lord Slayer, Luo He, and the others all stood up and greeted him. Sect Master, what was that sword ray just now? Lord Slayer immediately asked when he saw Chu Fengmian sitting on the throne. The power of that sword ray doesn't seem to be the sword art of our Sword Dao sect. It came from the depths of the Origin Sword world. Could it be that an enemy has invaded? Lord Slayer was a sword cultivator. He could clearly sense that the sword ray just now wasn't the sword art of the Sword Dao sect. It was completely different from the sword intent on Chu Fengmian's body. Therefore, he immediately thought that an enemy had invaded. It's me, Chu Fengmian said with a serious face. Lord Slayer, give the order to summon all disciples of the Sword Dao sect from the 9 regions back to the Origin Sword world. I'm afraid that something will happen in the next few days. The Upper Sword Enforcer token diagram was related to the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect. Now that the fact that Chu Fengmian possessed the Upper Sword Enforcer token diagram was exposed, there were many people who wanted to steal it from Chu Fengmian. Just now, Chu Fengmian felt that several spiritual senses were already probing Chu Fengmian. Obviously, there were already people who were tempted by the upper sword execution order portrait and wanted to snatch it. There were still 4 days before the upper sword sect's ruins opened. There would definitely be people who would make a move during this time. Chapter 2136. Now that Chu Fumian's identity had been exposed, it would be even more dangerous for him to head to the 9 regions. It would be better for him to stay in the Origin Sword world, where he could borrow the origin power of the Origin Sword world to fend off external enemies. However, Chu Fumian was worried that someone would attack the Sword Dao sect, so he immediately ordered the Sword Slayer King to summon all the disciples back to the Origin Sword world. Yes, Sect Master. The Sword Slayer King didn't hesitate at all when he heard Chu Fumian's order. He immediately channeled his spiritual energy into the Jade Talisman and sent out countless Jade Talismans, ordering all the disciples to return to the Origin Sword world. Sect Master, what exactly happened? After doing all this, the Mad Dragon Emperor asked Chu Fumian, "What's the matter?" His strength could be said to be the strongest in the Sword Dao sect, excluding Chu Fumian. He was also aware of the terrifying power contained in the sword light just now. The power of the sword light could be clearly seen by the entire 9 regions. Seeing how serious Chu Fumian was, it was definitely not a small matter. I obtained an upper sword execution token. Chu Fumian explained the origin of the upper sword execution token chart and its uses. If this token is really related to the inheritance of the upper sword sect, it is indeed a treasure that will make people go crazy. I'm afraid many experts will come snatch it. The Mad Dragon Emperor's face darkened when he heard Chu Fumian's explanation. He had heard of the great name of the Shang Sword sect before. It was the first Sword Dao sect. In this era, countless sword techniques were passed down from the ancient Shang Sword sect. If the upper sword execution token was really related to the inheritance of the upper sword sect, even profound Heaven Realm experts wouldn't be able to resist snatching it, let alone Sky Realm experts. No matter what, since the upper sword execution token is in the sect master's hands, it naturally can't be taken away by others. Whoever dares to come to the Origin Sword world will die. Qing Meng said coldly from aside. The upper sword execution token was so important that even Han Yueli, Luo Shi, Qing Meng, and the others who were in seclusion came out to discuss countermeasures. Just as they were discussing, a figure hurriedly walked in from outside. Sovereign. The person who walked in was none other than Luo He. He suddenly walked in from outside and spoke to Chu Fumian with an incomparably nervous expression. The people of the Shangquan sect are outside the sword origin world. They said that they want to pay their respects to the sect master. You sure are fast. Chu Fumian had just finished talking about the sword execution token chart when a sect came. Shangquan sect? Chu Fumian frowned. This name was extremely unfamiliar to him. It didn't sound like a sect from the 9 regions. This Shangquan sect is said to be a sect established by cultivators from the Holy Spring Starfield. There are 3 celestial realm cultivators among them. Seeing Chu Fumian's expression, the Sword Slayer monarch explained to Chu Fumian. With the drastic changes in the 9 regions, cultivators from various starfields came to the 9 regions one after another. There were also many cultivators who brought their families and disciples to the 9 regions to establish their own sects, just like the 5 major sects in the past. The Shangquan sect was one of them. They occupied a piece of land in the southern region of the 9 regions and established their own sect. Among the countless newly established sects in the 9 regions, they weren't considered weak. The Holy Spring Starfield is said to be a second-grade starfield. The old ancestor of the Shangquan sect is an immortal general expert. He's extremely powerful. The Sword Slayer monarch said from the side. His tone was incomparably fearful. An immortal general expert was more terrifying than 10 immortal realm cultivators. The Sword Dao sect and the Shangquan sect had never had any interactions. This time, the Shangquan sect's sudden visit definitely didn't have good intentions. There was only one purpose, and that was to obtain the sword execution token chart. Sovereign, do we meet them or not? Luo he looked at Chu Fumian and asked. In this hall, the only person who could make the decision was Chu Fumian. It's best if we don't meet them. If the origin energy of the sword origin world is fully activated, Even immortal generals won't be able to invade the sword origin world. The Mad Dragon Monarch said to Chu Fengyan, Sovereign, the Shangquan sect definitely doesn't have good intentions. Why don't we just meet them? Oh, why not? Of course we have to meet them. They're guests from afar. If we don't even meet them, they'll say that our Sword Dao sect doesn't know etiquette. Moreover, he's just a small immortal general. Even if he comes, what could he do? Sitting on the throne, Chu Fengmian's tone was incomparably relaxed. Hearing this, the Mad Dragon Monarch was speechless for a moment. From Chu Fengmian's tone, it was as if he didn't even put an immortal general in his eyes. A half-step celestial realm cultivator said, How dare he look down on an immortal general expert? This was simply arrogance to the extreme. However, after interacting with Chu Fengmian for a while, the Mad Dragon Monarch knew that Chu Fengmian wasn't the kind of person who would be arrogant for no reason. Since Chu Fengmian was so confident, he didn't say anything to persuade him. Bring them in. Chu Fengmian looked at Luo He and said, Yes. Luo He nodded and left the hall. Not long after, the door to the Origin Sword world opened and a few figures walked in. There were old and young figures among these few figures. The person in the lead was a middle-aged man. He was dressed in a long robe and had the demeanor of a transcendent being. The tyrannical power of heaven and earth shrouded his body, revealing his strength. He was an immortal realm cultivator. As for the few young people behind him, although they were all young, they had already stepped into the half-step celestial realm. They were all first-class geniuses. After entering the Sword Origin world, the youths began to scan their surroundings. This Sword Origin world is said to be the sacred ground of a native sect of the 9 regions. I didn't expect it to be so powerful and have such rich and pure spiritual energy. One of the young people said in surprise, It's a pity that the disciples here are too weak. Most of them are far inferior to our Shangquan sect. Even in 9 tribulations Emperor Gu is rarely seen here. It's said that even in 9 tribulations Emperor Gu can become an elder in the Sword Dao sect. So weak? The 9 tribulations Emperor Gu is at most a core disciple in our Shangquan sect. He can barely be an outer elder. Even a few of my servants are 9 tribulations Emperor Gu. These natives of the 9 regions have taken over such a good place. What a waste. If this sacred ground was given to our Shangquan sect could at least nurture countless geniuses. A Shangquan sect disciple's eyes revealed a hint of greed. Chapter 21:37. Look, the soil on the ground is 5-colored growing soil. A young disciple of the Sacred Springs sect suddenly pointed at a mountain peak and said, The land on the mountain peak was filled with 5 colors, and it emitted a sweet fragrance. 5-colored growing soil. It's really 5-colored growing soil. The other disciples of the Shangquan sect also looked over and said in shock. They all knew that 5-colored growing soil was the best soil for growing sacred herbs. The sacred herbs that grew in it would grow 10 times or even 100 times faster than those that grew in ordinary soil. 5-colored growing soil could only be found in some treasured lands with extremely rich spiritual energy. Even a little 5-colored growing soil was priceless. At this moment, when they looked over, they could see that the ground on the mountain peaks was actually covered in 5 different colors. All of them were 5-colored growing soil. They had never seen so much 5-colored growing soil before. It's a pity that such a sacred place is occupied by a bunch of trash. A disciple of the Shangquan sect looked at the disciples of the Sword Dao sect below and said with disdain, Don't talk nonsense. We're here to negotiate with the Sword Dao sect. Don't let them get hold of our weakness. The middle-aged man, who was the leader, snorted coldly when he heard the words. Yes, great elder. The disciples of the Shangquan sect behind the great elder said at the same time and stopped talking. Under Luo He's lead, the group of people of the Shangquan sect entered the Cloud Feather Palace together. Sect Master, the disciples of the Shangquan sect have been brought here. Luo He entered the Cloud Feather Palace and said to Chu Fengyan respectfully before retreating to the side. Sect Master, the disciples of the Shangquan sect looked at Chu Fengyan when they heard the name. They sized up Chu Fengyan's realm, and their eyes were filled with surprise. It seemed that he did not expect that the Sword Dao sect master was actually a half-step celestial realm martial artist. Outside of the Sword Dao sect, it had always been the Sword Slayer King, Luo He, and the others who were in charge of contacting the other sections. When they needed experts, the Mad Dragon Emperor would also act. As for the sect master, Chu Fengmian, he was mysterious and unfathomable. Apart from the 7 great sects of the 9 regions, only the people from the 5 great sects had seen him before. However, the 5 major sects had been completely destroyed by Chu Fengmian. Not a single disciple survived. Therefore, there were many rumors about the Sword Dao sect master. However, no one expected that Chu Fengmian was not even a celestial realm warrior. After the initial shock, many of the Shangquan sect disciples revealed looks of disdain and contempt. This old man is the great elder of the Shangquan sect. Greetings, sect leader of the Kendo sect. The great elder of the Shangquan sect glanced at Chu Fengmian and said flatly. He said that he was paying his respects, but there was no respect in his tone. As for the disciples of the Shangquan sect behind him, they only glanced at Chu Fengmian and did not say a word. This made the eyes of the people of the Kendo sect a little unfriendly. However, since Chu Fengmian did not say anything, they did not say anything either. Is this how the so-called greeting is supposed to be? Chu Fengmian glanced at the group of Shangquan sect disciples and said slowly, "Since you are so insincere, please get lost." Chu Fengmian could also tell at a glance that this group of Shangquan sect disciples did not come with good intentions. Therefore, Chu Fengmian did not need to be polite to them. Boy, what do you mean by this? Upon hearing Chu Fengmian's words, a disciple of the Shangquan sect suddenly stepped forward and looked at Chu Fengmian coldly. You're just a kid who is half a step into the celestial realm. You haven't even stepped into the celestial realm. What makes you worthy of us paying our respects? Today, we have already given you enough face by coming to the Origin Sword world. You don't have to put on airs here as the sect master. There are hundreds of people in our Shangquan sect who are only half a step into the celestial realm. Who do you think you are? The words of a Shangquan sect disciple were simply provoking Chu Fengmian. However, the first elder of the Shangquan sect in front of him did not stop the Shangquan sect disciple and let him continue speaking. As soon as his voice fell, the faces of Mad Dragon Emperor, Han Yueli, Luo Shi, and the others suddenly burst out with a bit of killing intent. This did not look like a greeting at all. It was more like a direct provocation. Presumptuous. How rude. You are courting death. Without waiting for Chu Fengmian's reply, Mad Dragon Emperor shouted coldly. A stream of dragon power condensed in the palm of his hand and suddenly turned into a dragon claw. He slammed it down and directly bombarded the Shangquan sect disciple. Chu Fengmian was the sect master of the Sword Dao sect. Now that the disciple of the Shangquan sect had come to provoke Chu Fengmian, he was basically provoking the entire Sword Dao sect. How could he tolerate this? Mad Dragon Emperor shouted angrily and slammed the dragon claw down fiercely. Mad Dragon Emperor, you are also a celestial realm expert. Don't you think it is too much to attack a junior? The moment the dragon claw slammed down, the first elder of the Shangquan sect also made his move. A stream of spiritual power suddenly appeared in his hand and turned into a barrier in front of the Shangquan sect disciple, blocking the dragon claw. Too much. How dare he challenge my dignity? Killing him is too easy for him. Luo Shi, capture him, strip him of his essence and blood, and throw him outside the main hall to kneel. Chu Fengmian snorted coldly. His voice was incomparably dignified. Like a command of the truth, there was no room for doubt. The moment she heard Chu Fengmian's words, Luo, she made her move. A stream of chaotic energy condensed from her hand and blasted out, turning into an invisible giant hand that suddenly grabbed at the disciple of the Shangquan sect. Not good. The disciple of the Shangquan sect who had previously provoked Luo, she changed his expression when he saw her move. He instinctively felt that something was wrong. He felt that Luo Shi's strength was not something he could match. Seeing the invisible giant hand grabbing at him, the disciple of the Shangquan sect hurriedly shouted, First Elder, save me. Stop. The First Elder of the Shangquan sect did not expect that there would be another Celestial Realm expert. According to the rumors in the 9 regions, the Mad Dragon Emperor was the only Celestial Realm expert in the Sword Dao sect. Therefore, he came this time without fear. His strength was not below that of the Mad Dragon Emperor. Even if the Mad Dragon Emperor attacked, he was not afraid, especially when he saw that Chu Fengyan was only a half-step Celestial Realm expert. He felt that Chu Fengyan was just a puppet of the Mad Dragon Emperor. The Sword Dao sect had already fallen into the hands of the Mad Dragon Emperor. He naturally did not put Chu Fengyan in his eyes, so he allowed the disciple of the Shangquan sect to provoke Chu Fengyan. But now that he saw Luo Shi make a move, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Just as he was about to withdraw to save the disciple, Luo Shi's invisible hand had already grasped the disciple of the Shangquan sect in the palm of her hand. Chapter 21:38. Dying. The Shangquan sect disciple was caught in the palm of Luo Shi's invisible hand, and his body immediately exploded. Bang! The Shangquan sect disciple was crushed to death in Luo Shi's hand, without the slightest ability to fight back. With Luo Shi's current Celestial Realm, it was easy for him to kill a half-step Celestial Realm warrior. The Shangquan sect's great elder didn't even have time to save him before he saw the Shangquan sect disciple being killed in the air. There was no sign of life, and he died on the spot. Mad Dragon Emperor, what is the meaning of your Sword Dao sect? The Shangquan sect's great elder's eyes were filled with shock and anger. He was surprised that there was a second Celestial Realm expert in the Sword Dao sect. Luo Shi was also one of the deputy sect masters of the Sword Dao sect. He had heard of him before, but it was rumored that Luo Shi was only a half-step Celestial Realm expert. However, the strength that Luo Shi had just unleashed was definitely the strength of a Celestial Realm expert. Unknowingly, there was another Celestial Realm expert in the Sword Dao sect. This made him suddenly feel that the Sword Dao sect's strength was still hidden. The one who was angry was that the Shangquan sect disciple was directly killed by Luo Shi. Luo Shi had no intention of showing any mercy when he attacked. The Shangquan sect disciples he brought this time were the most outstanding Shangquan sect's holy sons. All of them were geniuses, and many of them were peerless geniuses with hopes of breaking through the celestial tribulation in the future. The Shangquan sect also wanted to show their strength by bringing them here to intimidate the Sword Dao sect, but they didn't expect that they would be killed by Luo Shi today. The Shangquan sect's great elder's face was incomparably gloomy, and his eyes were filled with boundless anger. He would never let this matter rest. Mad Dragon Emperor, don't you plan to give an explanation? You must give an explanation. Those who killed Jin Chong must be buried with him. No, it can't be that simple. The Sword Dao sect must also compensate. Let's fight. Let's fight. The Sword Dao sect actually ignored the rules and killed people directly. This was a provocation. If you don't give me an explanation, henceforth, the Shangquan sect and the Kendo sect will be mortal enemies. The other Shangquan sect disciples also shouted loudly. The disciples of the Shangquan sect had never put the Sword Dao sect in their eyes. Their eyes were filled with killing intent as they looked at Luo Shi. They couldn't wait to avenge Jin Chong. However, due to the strength that Luo Shi had just displayed, no one dared to make a move. Mad Dragon Emperor, your Sword Dao sect must give us an explanation today. The great elder of the Shangquan sect said coldly when he saw that the Mad Dragon Emperor did not reply. If you don't give me an explanation, just wait for the war to start. The Mad Dragon Emperor looked at the great elder of the Shangquan sect coldly, without saying a word. Chu Fengmian was here, so it was not his turn to speak. He just looked at the great elder of the Shangquan sect, as if he was looking at a dead man. Explain? What explanation? A mere disciple of the Shangquan sect dares to provoke me? Death is not to be regretted. Chu Fengmian, who was sitting on the throne, said coldly. As for you, it seems that you don't want to live today. You want to start a war? Today, all of you will die here. Chu Fengmian looked at the great elder of the Shangquan sect, and the killing intent in his voice was undisguised. These disciples of the Shangquan sect had just entered the origin world, and their movements were under Chu Feng Mian's control. Naturally, he knew that these people were not of good origin. If the Shangquan sect had come politely, Chu Feng Mian would have given them some face. But since they had directly provoked him, Chu Feng Mian naturally wouldn't give them any face. As for the so-called war, Chu Feng Mian didn't care at all, since only one of the 3 celestial realm experts of the Shangquan sect was an immortal general. Given Chu Feng Mian's strength, he could easily kill an immortal general. As for the remaining 2 celestial realm experts, for example, Chu Feng Mian didn't even need to do anything to the great elder of the Shangquan sect. Han Yueli and Luo, she could kill him. Chu Feng Mian had never taken the Shangquan sect seriously, and he was fearless. The great elder of the Shangquan sect threatened to start a war, but Chu Feng Mian didn't care at all. You've been spying for so long. It's time to come out. Chu Feng Mian didn't wait for the great elder of the Shangquan sect to speak. He suddenly shouted toward the outside of the hall. Boom! The moment Chu Feng Mian's voice rang out, a figure suddenly condensed outside the hall. This figure was extremely tall and slowly condensed into a white-haired old man who walked into the hall. Ancestor. Upon seeing the white-haired old man, the great elder of the Shangquan sect and all the disciples of the Shangquan sect bowed respectfully. The white-haired old man was the strongest expert of the Shangquan sect, as well as the ancestor of the Shangquan sect, Ancestor Holy Spring. Chu Feng Mian had long discovered that someone had been spying on the Sword Dao sect, and had even secretly infiltrated the sect. It was impossible for an immortal general to hide from Chu Feng Mian and sneak into the Sword Dao sect without anyone noticing. Chu Feng Mian was in the Origin Sword world. Even a profound heaven realm immortal marquis wouldn't be able to hide from Chu Feng Mian's eyes, let alone an immortal general. Ancestor Holy Spring was a little surprised when he was called out by Chu Feng Mian. After all, he was an immortal general expert, so he didn't put the Sword Dao sect in his eyes at all. He sneaked in quietly for 2 reasons. Firstly, he wanted to find the upper sword execution order chart. Secondly, he wanted to probe the Sword Dao sect's strength. He hadn't expected that he'd been exposed long ago. Now that Chu Feng Mian had called him out, there was no need for him to continue hiding. He directly showed himself. Ancestor, Jin Chong was killed by that person. Ancestor, please avenge us. A Shangquan sect disciple walked out and pointed at Luo Shi when he saw Ancestor Holy Spring arrive. Ancestor Holy Spring's arrival made them even more arrogant. He was an immortal general expert and one of the few immortal generals in the 9 domains. The Shangquan sect had been able to occupy one of the 9 domains and establish their own sect precisely because of the deterrence of an immortal general expert like Ancestor Holy Spring. Previously, the 5 great sects hadn't dared to establish their own sect in the 9 domains, even though they joined forces. Instead, they'd chosen a small world near the 9 domains. There were no weaklings among the sects that could establish their own sect in the 9 domains. None of the Shangquan sect's disciples have died in vain. Old Ancestor Holy Spring nodded. His gaze swept across the crowd as he spoke in an indifferent tone. You've killed our disciples, so you should give us an explanation. Our Shangquan sect has come with friendly intentions this time. If we don't give you an explanation for the deaths of our disciples, it wouldn't be right. Chapter 2139. When old Ancestor Holy Spring arrived at the palace, he immediately probed the strength of everyone in the Sword Dao sect. He could see that the Sword Dao sect was indeed different from the rumors. Apart from Mad Dragon Emperor, Luo Shi and Han Yueli had already stepped into the Celestial Realm. Now, the Sword Dao sect had 3 Celestial Realm experts. However, the 3 demon deities who had just stepped into the Celestial Realm were nothing in his eyes. He was an immortal general. Even if there were 10 demon deities in the immortal realm, they would not be a match for him. After probing clearly, he was even more fearless and questioned coldly. Explanation? What kind of explanation do you want? Chu Fengmian sat on the throne, facing old Ancestor Holy Spring. His expression was incomparably calm. Chu Fengmian's calm expression made old Ancestor Holy Spring feel a little strange. He had probed several times, But the result was that Chu Fengmian was only in the half-step celestial realm. With his current strength, half-step celestial realm experts were no different from ants. However, not only did Chu Fengmian call out his figure, but he also looked calm when facing him. If it were other half-step celestial realm experts, they would be incomparably terrified when facing a celestial realm expert, let alone an immortal general. However, Chu Fengmian's gaze was incomparably calm. This kind of calmness was not faked, but came from the bottom of his heart. This kind of strangeness made old ancestor Holy Spring feel a little strange, but it only lasted for a moment. Soon, he became incomparably indifferent. Even if the Sword Dao sect had some tricks up their sleeves, they would be vulnerable in front of his absolute strength. It's very simple. Today, I'm only here for one thing. Hand over this thing, and we can leave. From then on, all grievances will be written off. My Shinquan sect is not willing to kill the innocent. Give us an explanation, and we can leave. Old ancestor Holy Spring stared at Chu Fengmian and said, "Let bygones be bygones? Not willing to kill the innocent? Old man, if you want the sword execution order portrait, you don't have to be so righteous." Hearing old ancestor Holy Spring's words, Chu Fengmian laughed. The purpose of the Shanquan sect's visit to the Sword Dao sect was obvious. It was for the sword execution order portrait. Old ancestor Holy Spring's words were so righteous. He sword execution order portrait. What did he want? It seems like you're a sensible person. Since that's the case, I won't waste any more words with you. Old ancestor Holy Spring said Chu Fengmian's didn't beat around the bush. Hand over the upper sword execution order chart, and I'll forget about what happened today. Sword Dao sect has a sexes. Chu Fengmian sat on the throne and looked at ancestor Holy Spring with a relaxed expression. He even waved his hand, and a cup of hot tea fell into his hand. While drinking, he spoke casually. What if I don't agree? If you don't agree, don't blame my Sacred Spring sect for being merciless. Old ancestor Holy Spring stared at Chu Fengmian. He couldn't see through Chu Fengmian at all. Chu Fengmian didn't show any fear under his threat. He didn't look like a half-step celestial being at all. But today, he was determined to get the sword execution order portrait. Even if Chu Fengmian was strange, he wouldn't give up. It sounds scary. Unfortunately, it's just a small Shinquan sect. So what if I'm ruthless? It's just a little more blood on my hands. Chu Fengmian finished his tea and said slowly, "Old ancestor, don't waste your breath on this boy. A small Sword Dao sect dares to kill a disciple of our Shanquan sect. It's a capital offense. It's not enough to kill the entire Sword Dao sect." The great elder of Shanquan sect suddenly said to old ancestor Holy Spring, "I'll give you one last chance, boy. Hand over the sword execution order portrait." Old ancestor Holy Spring glared at Chu Fengmian with boundless killing intent. Immortal force was also condensing on his body. He was ready to strike at any time and sweep away everything with his tyrannical power. The sword execution order portrait is here. Come and get it if you have the ability. Chu Fengmian moved his palm, and an ancient portrait emerged in front of him. It was the sword execution order portrait. The sword execution order portrait. The moment old ancestor Holy Spring saw the ancient map, his eyes were filled with endless greed. Although this was the first time the Holy Spring Patriarch had seen the upper sword execution token chart, he was certain that this was the upper sword execution token chart the moment he sensed the sword intent on it. The sword execution order portrait was related to the inheritance of the Sword Dao sect. Its value was immeasurable. "Give it to me." Boom! The moment he saw the portrait, old ancestor Holy Spring made his move. Immortal force erupted from his body like the birth of a true dragon. It swept down and grabbed at the sword execution order portrait. This burst of celestial spiritual energy rushed toward the throne. The target of this celestial spiritual energy wasn't just the sword execution token. It was also Chu Fengmian. Old ancestor Holy Spring didn't just want to take the sword execution order portrait. He also wanted to kill Chu Fengmian. Watch out! Mad Dragon Emperor, Han Yueli, and Luo, she were ready to support Chu Fengmian when they saw old ancestor Holy Spring make his move. However, They didn't expect Old Ancestor Holy Spring to be so much faster than them. He arrived in front of Chu Fengmian far ahead of them. Immortal force erupted from his body and condensed into a palm that came crashing down. "You're courting death." Sitting on the throne, Chu Fengmian's expression didn't change in the slightest when he saw the immortal power bombarding him. He just slowly raised his hand, and with a bang, a surge of dragon power condensed in his palm and slammed down from the sky. A battle dragon claw formed above Chu Fengmian's head and swept down. The immortal force of Old Ancestor Holy Spring was shattered by the battle dragon claw. Not only did the battle dragon claw shatter Old Ancestor Holy Spring's immortal force, but it also came crashing down on him. Holy Spring true body. Old Ancestor Holy Spring let out a long roar. His body grew several times bigger, and his whole body was covered in a golden color. It was a secret technique of body refining that was being used. Body refining Dao. Let's see if your body is tougher, or if my sword is sharper. Chu Fengmian suddenly made his move. He unsheathed the ancestral Dragon Supreme sword and ruthlessly slashed out a stream of sword chi. It slashed through the air and aimed at Old Ancestor Holy Spring. Hiss! Everyone could hear the sound of the sword chi tearing the space apart. The moment the sword light was unleashed, it slashed at Old Ancestor Holy Spring's chest. Crack! The first layer of Old Ancestor Holy Spring's golden body emitted a cracking sound. In the next moment, it shattered and blood splattered everywhere. First, set a small target. For example, 1 second. Remember, book guest residence. Chapter 2140. Blood spurted out from Old Ancestor Holy Spring's body in the air. There was a cut on Old Ancestor Holy Spring's chest. Ow, is this possible? The disciples of the Shenquan sect were stunned at the scene. They were speechless for a moment, and their eyes widened in disbelief. The old ancestor of the Shenquan sect, an invincible immortal general, was wounded by Chu Fengmian's sword. How could they not be shocked? They were all dumbfounded. Even Han Yueli, Luo Shi, Mad Dragon Emperor, and the others who had seen Chu Fengmian in action before were stunned as they stared blankly at the scene. Who the hell are you? Old Ancestor Holy Spring kept retreating. The wound on his chest was quickly healed. With his strength, the wound could be healed in an instant, but the sword just now could not erase it. He could not resist the power of the sword, even with his full strength. Instead, he was injured. The invincible golden body he had painstakingly condensed was broken by the sword. His invincible golden body had been painstakingly condensed using countless treasures. With this invincible golden body, Old Ancestor Holy Spring could be considered an expert among the demon immortals of the immortal general realm. But under Chu Fengmian's sword, the invincible golden body was so fragile. Old Ancestor Holy Spring's expression changed dramatically. He looked at Chu Fengmian like a monster. Old Ancestor Holy Spring could clearly see that Chu Fengmian was only a half-step celestial being. That realm was not fake, but Chu Fengmian's current strength was not something a half-step celestial being could possess. All of this stunned Old Ancestor Holy Spring for a moment. I'm the one who will send you to your death. While Old Ancestor Holy Spring was still in shock, Chu Fengmian, who was sitting on the throne, suddenly waved his spiritual sword. Another sword light was launched at Old Ancestor Holy Spring. Anyone who dared to snatch the sword and force her token illustration would be Chu Fengmian's mortal enemy. Since Old Ancestor Holy Spring wanted to be the first to stand out, Chu Fengmian would kill him first to establish his prestige. Even though this battle was taking place in the Sword Origin world, the battle was still ongoing. Chu Fengmian also felt that countless spiritual consciousnesses were transmitted from the distant space, watching the battle. Elder Holy Spring was not the only one who coveted the Sword Executor illustration. The inheritance of the Upper Sword sect could cause countless experts of the 9 regions to fight for it. However, before they were certain of Chu Fengmian's strength, these people would not act rashly. Today, Chu Fengmian wanted to kill Old Ancestor Holy Spring and establish his prestige. By then, The other immortal generals would have to think twice before snatching the upper sword execution order chart from Chu Fengmian's hands. Forefather Holy Spring must die today. At the same time, an invincible sword will rose from Chu Fengmian's back the moment the sword was slashed out. The sword will condense on the edge of the sword and burst out with even more power than the previous sword. Go! Flawless! Forefather Sacred Spring let out a long howl. When he saw the sword coming, he instantly turned around and vanished without a trace. He suddenly flew out of the sword origin world. He knew that he had underestimated Chu Fengmian this time. He had rashly entered the sword origin boundary, which was Chu Fengmian's lair. If they were in the outside world, he still had the ability to fight Chu Fengmian. However, in the sword origin boundary, with the help of the sword origin boundary's origin energy, he would undoubtedly die if he fought Chu Fengmian. Run! Seeing old ancestor Holy Spring flee, the Grand Elder of the Shangquan sect led the other Shangquan sect disciples to turn tail and flee as well. They activated an escape light and flew out of the sword origin boundary. Chu Fengmian coldly watched all of this and shouted coldly, "No one from the Shangquan sect can leave. Kill them all." Yes. Han Yueli, Luo Shi, and Mad Dragon Emperor responded. Immediately, an escape light burst out and chased after the Shangquan sect disciples. Each of them executed countless killing moves to kill the Shangquan sect disciples. Mad Dragon Emperor stopped the Grand Elder of the Shangquan sect by himself. As for Han Yueli and Luo Shi, they rushed into the crowd. These half-step celestial realm Shangquan sect disciples were powerless in front of the two of them and were easily killed. As for Chu Fengmian, he was still sitting on the throne. His gaze seemed to be able to see through countless spaces. Chu Fengmian's gaze locked onto ancestor Holy Spring, who had disappeared under the layers of space. "Since you're here, there's no need to leave," Chu Fengmian said in an indifferent tone. Although Chu Fengmian's tone was calm, anyone could hear the murderous intent in his tone. This was a killing intent. Chu Fengmian had to kill old ancestor Holy Spring. Origin source suppression. As Chu Fengmian spoke, he slowly raised his hand and pressed down with his palm facing down. Rumble. Suddenly, a violent and boundless power erupted in the sky above the origin sword world. Streaks of seven-colored light, which had been hidden in the sky above the origin sword world, suddenly appeared. These streaks of seven-colored light were like a huge lake that dyed the entire sky above the origin sword world in a rainbow color. This was the origin source power of the origin source boundary. This was the first time Chu Fengmian had used the origin source power after upgrading the origin source boundary. Boundless power erupted and turned into a long dragon. Under Chu Fengmian's guidance, it rushed towards old ancestor Holy Spring to suppress him. This origin source energy was just pure strength. It didn't contain any technique. When it came crashing down, it instantly traversed countless spaces and found old ancestor Holy Spring. Then, all of it bombarded old ancestor Holy Spring. Buzz! Old ancestor Holy Spring's body stopped in the depths of the void. It wasn't that he wanted to stop, but under the bombardment of the origin source power, he was blasted out from the depths of the void. Even if several immortal generals joined forces, they still wouldn't be able to withstand the origin energy of the sword origin world. Moreover, old ancestor Holy Spring had already been injured by Chu Fengmian's sword. Under the pressure of the boundless origin energy, old ancestor Holy Spring was already on the verge of collapsing. He was trying his best to resist the suppression of the origin energy. Suppress. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian moved. With a move of his palm, a square seal appeared in his palm and flew out. It flew above old ancestor Holy Spring and immediately suppressed him. The suppression of the life great seal made old ancestor Holy Spring, who was already exhausted, unable to resist. "No!" Old ancestor Holy Spring shouted loudly, but it was meaningless. His body had already been enveloped by the life great seal. End of chapter. Chapter 2141. As ancestor Holy Spring screamed, his body was suppressed by the life seal. His voice faded away bit by bit. Ancestor Holy Spring was suppressed in the deepest space of the life seal. His power was completely sealed, and he could no longer escape. All the disciples of the Sword Tao sect fell silent at the sight of this. For a moment, no one spoke. Ancestor Holy Spring was a world-renowned expert in the 9 domains. He was an invincible, immortal general. But now, Ancestor Holy Spring was suppressed by the life seal and Chu Fengyan. It should be known that suppressing an immortal general was much more difficult than killing one. This was because all immortal generals would rather self-detonate than be suppressed. Once old Ancestor Sacred Spring was subdued, his life would be in Chu Fengyan's hands, and his life would be in the hands of Chu Fengyan. Even if he wanted to die now, he couldn't. No one could have imagined that Ancestor Holy Spring's trip to the Sword Tao sect to snatch the upper sword execution token chart would end up like this. Above the sword origin boundary, countless spiritual consciousnesses that were observing the battle and the experts behind them were stunned. They didn't expect Ancestor Holy Spring to be so weak that he would be suppressed by Chu Fengyan. All of them had speculated that even if Chu Fengyan won the battle, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. At the very least, Chu Fengyan would be injured, and they would be able to seize the opportunity to snatch the upper sword execution token chart. But now, Chu Fengyan was sitting on the throne. Chu Fengyan didn't even have to make a move personally. Just the sword light that crossed thousands of miles was enough to force Ancestor Holy Spring into a desperate situation. Not a single disciple of the Sword Tao sect was injured because of this battle. It was only a matter of time before Ancestor Holy Spring was suppressed and subdued by Chu Fengyan. In the future, the Sword Tao sect would have another immortal general as a servant. The strength of the Sword Tao sect would also grow stronger because of this battle. None of them had expected this to happen. This person isn't easy to deal with. Let's go. Some experts immediately retracted their spiritual senses and stopped fighting after watching the battle. Although old Ancestor Holy Spring wasn't considered the top among the demon immortals, he was definitely an expert. He could be considered above average. But now, old Ancestor Holy Spring didn't have the strength to fight back. Many of them were even weaker than Forefather Holy Spring. Trying to snatch the upper sword execution portrait from Chu Fengyan was tantamount to courting death. Immortal generals were all incomparably shrewd. They weren't willing to die for nothing. Old Ancestor Holy Spring was betting that the Sword Tao sect was as weak as the rumors said. That was why he had acted so rashly. But now that everyone had seen old Ancestor Holy Spring's fate, no one dared to gamble anymore. Chu Fengyan raised his leg and looked at the sky above the origin sword world. He could sense that at least half of his spiritual consciousness had disappeared. These people had already been intimidated by Chu Fengyan and had given up on the idea of snatching the Shang sword execution order chart. There was more than one Shang sword execution order chart in Chu Fengyan's hand. There were a total of 12 Shang sword execution order charts. Therefore, they might not keep an eye on Chu Fengyan. As the opening of the upper sword sect's ruins drew closer, more and more Shang sword execution order charts would emerge. During the battle, just now, Chu Fengyan had already sensed a sword radiance soaring into the sky. Among the 9 domains, another person had obtained the Shang sword execution order chart and made it recognize him as its master. Therefore, even if some people wanted to obtain the Shang sword execution order chart, they didn't necessarily have to obtain the one in Chu Fengyan's hand. It was just that the Sword Tao sect's strength was the weakest at the beginning. That was why so many people had gathered to spy on it. Chu Fengyan had killed old Ancestor Holy Spring with the intention of displaying his strength and intimidating others. If the Shang sword execution order chart hadn't been exposed, Chu Fengyan would have chosen to keep a low profile. But now that it had been exposed, there was no point in keeping a low profile. At this time, only strength could determine who the master of the Shang sword execution order chart was. Of course, not all of the spectators had left. At least a third of the spectators had stayed behind to observe Chu Fengyan after witnessing the battle. These people hadn't given up yet. The Shang sword execution order chart is right here. Whoever wants to take it, feel free to come. However, Only death awaits those who dare step into the sword origin world. Chu Fengyan said indifferently as he looked outside the sword origin world. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone outside the sword origin world could hear him clearly. Chu Fengyan was confident that he would be able to keep the Shang sword execution order chart. Although the 9 domains had gathered experts from tens of thousands of star domains, there were still very few immortal generals. Generally, only one immortal general expert would be born in a second-grade star domain. Inside the sword origin world, Chu Fengyan didn't fear the combined might of several immortal generals by relying on the origin power of the sword origin world. Chu Fengyan's words have been heard clearly by the spies outside the sword origin world. Humph! A half-step sky human brat dares to provoke an immortal general by relying on the origin power of a sacred land? We brothers want the Shang sword execution order chart. Suddenly, a cold snort sounded. 2 streaks of light suddenly stepped into the sword origin world from outside. These 2 figures looked very similar. They were a pair of brothers. However, their clothes were completely different. They were both wearing long robes, but one was black and the other was white. The black and white young lords? Gasps of surprise sounded outside the sword origin world when they saw the 2. As expected, this pair of brothers are determined to obtain the upper sword execution token illustration. These 2 are both experts of the sword Dao. It's not strange that they want to obtain the inheritance of the sword sect. The origin power of the sacred land isn't easy to deal with. I feel that even if the black and white young lords join forces, they might not be able to resist the origin power. Why would they dare to make a move? I don't know. However, the 2 of them are from the incomparably ancient black and white sword sect. The black and white sword sect's history can be traced back to hundreds of thousands of years ago. Perhaps they have some unknown method to deal with the origin power. The experts discussed with each other as they watched the battle. Many of them didn't give up on the Shang sword execution order chart. The black and white young lords also wanted to see Chu Fengyan's true strength. After all, when Chu Fengyan suppressed Ancestor Holy Spring, it was too easy. It seemed that he hadn't even used his full strength. They wanted to know Chu Fengyan's true strength so that they could think of a way to deal with him. Furthermore, they were also waiting for an opportunity. If the black and white young lords were to fight Chu Fengyan to a draw, they would definitely make a move and reap the benefits. End of chapter. Chapter 2142. 2 more immortal generals have arrived. In Cloud Feather Palace, Lord Slayer, Luo He, Green Dream, and the others looked extremely unsightly. Ancestor Holy Spring's arrival was already troublesome enough. Chu Fengyan's ease in suppressing him had already exceeded their expectations. They'd thought that the spies outside the origin sword boundary would disperse after Chu Fengyan had suppressed Ancestor Holy Spring. They hadn't expected more people to arrive so soon. Black and white young lords. Chu Fengyan was no stranger to these 2 figures. He'd previously seized the memories of Tian Shangjindi, so he had some knowledge of the famous experts of the 9 realms. The black and white young lords were a pair of twin brothers from the same ancient sect, the Black and White Sword Sect. It was said that 1,000 years ago, the Black and White Sword Sect had been divided into 2 independent sects, the White Sword Sect and the Black Sword Sect. However, with the rise of the Black and White Young Lords, the Sword Sect, which had been divided for tens of thousands of years, had once again merged into one. The Black and White Young Lords had inherited the sword techniques of the Black Sword Sect and the White Sword Sect respectively, becoming famous experts in the extraterritorial starry sky. The sword techniques of the Black and White Sword Sect complemented each other, so their combined might was far more tyrannical than if they were alone. The Black and White Young Lords were a pair of twin brothers who were telepathically connected. When they attacked together, even 3 or 4 immortal generals might not be a match for them. It was no wonder that the 2 of them were so confident after seeing how easily Chu Fengyan had subdued Ancestor Holy Spring. They'd come to compete for the upper sword execution chart. Kid, the 2 of us are here for nothing but the upper sword execution token illustration. Hand it over, and we'll leave right away. Clad in white, White Young Lord came to the front of Cloud Feather Palace, and looked at Chu Fengmian. Compared to ancestor Holy Spring, White Young Lord was even more sanctimonious. He didn't hide his intentions and directly said that he was here for the upper sword execution chart. Both the Black and White Young Lords were sword experts. Whoever obtained the chart would be able to compete for the inheritance of the upper sword sect. The upper sword execution chart is here. Come in and take it if you can. Chu Fengmian sat on the throne and looked at the upper sword execution chart in front of him. If you don't want to hand it over, then I won't be polite. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, Bai Xiaojun exchanged a look with He Xiaojun. Attack! The two of them made their moves almost simultaneously. Bai Xiaojun rushed directly into the Cloud Feather Palace, and a powerful sword will burst out from his back. He took a step forward and flew straight to the throne. Then, he reached out his hand to grab the upper sword executor's portrait. On the other side, He Xiaojun did not try to snatch the upper sword execution token illustration. Instead, he rushed into the sky and blocked the seven-colored light. When they had seen Chu Fengmian suppress Patriarch Holy Spring, the Black and White Young Masters have been extremely wary of the origin power of the sword origin boundary. Therefore, the White Young Master had been the one to snatch the sword execution token chart. As for He Xiaojun, he was responsible for blocking the origin energy of the sword origin world. The origin energy of the sword origin world erupted once again the moment the Black and White Young Masters made their move. Rays of rainbow-colored light blasted down from the sky with a loud bang. He Xiaojun let out a long roar and unsheathed an immortal spiritual sword. This immortal spiritual sword was also pitch black. It was unknown what kind of metal it was made of, but there was not the slightest bit of light on it. Any light that shone on it would be devoured by the endless darkness. The Seven Knights Sword. This is the supreme treasure of the Black Sword sect, the Seven Knights Sword. I didn't expect He Xiaojun to bring out the supreme treasure of the Black Sword sect. Outside the sword origin world, many experts had already recognized the origin of the immortal spiritual sword in He Xiaojun's hand. The Black and White Sword sect was an extremely ancient sword sect with a heritage of hundreds of thousands of years. It had once been glorious and had left behind countless powerful treasures. Among them, the Seven Knights Sword was the supreme treasure of the Black Sword sect. It was famous among the innumerable immortal spiritual swords. As He Xiaojun unsheathed the Seven Knights Sword, sword will erupted from his body and dyed the sky in darkness. At the core of this darkness was the Seven Knights Sword in his hand. With a slash of the sword, the endless darkness collided with the seven-colored light descending from the sky and blocked the attack of the origin energy of the sword origin world. No wonder the Black and White Young Masters dared to come and snatch the upper sword execution token illustration. This time, the two of them brought out all the supreme treasures of the Black and White Sword sect. It seems like the Black and White Young Masters really have a chance of obtaining the upper sword execution token illustration this time. Many experts who were hidden outside the sword origin world began to discuss when they saw this scene. A decent spiritual sword. In Cloud Feather Palace, Chu Fengmian, who was sitting on the throne, could clearly see what was happening outside. When he saw the Seven Knights Sword in He Xiaojun's hand, he praised it. Although the Seven Knights Sword wasn't an extreme immortal weapon, it was still a supreme-grade immortal weapon among the countless spiritual swords Chu Fengmian had seen. Currently, Chu Fengmian's ancestral dragon paragon sword had undergone countless transformations and had been soaked in the blood of countless experts. In addition to the power of Chu Fengmian's dragon source energy, it could at most fight to a draw with the Seven Knights Sword. If Chu Fengmian fought with He Xiaojun, he wouldn't have the slightest advantage in terms of weapons. It's not just the Seven Knights Sword. I've also brought the supreme treasure of the White Sword sect. I've long heard that the Sword Dao sect has inherited the sword techniques of the Sword Dao master. Today, I'm here to experience it for myself. Bai Xiaojun looked at Chu Fengmian and sneered. The moment he reached out to grab the upper sword execution token illustration, a spiritual sword suddenly unsheathed in his right hand. The moment the spiritual sword left its sheath, the sword will within it couldn't be suppressed. It transformed into countless rays of sword qi and slashed toward Chu Fengyan. It's by Fengjian of the White Sword sect. It's said to be a sharp sword that can cut through immortal weapons. Sure enough, Bai Xiaojun also brought Bai Fengjian with him. This time, He Xiaojun is determined to obtain the upper sword execution token illustration. When they saw He Xiaojun take out the Seven Knight sword, they weren't so surprised to see Bai Xiaojun take out the Bai Fengjian. Since He Xiaojun dared to enter the origin sword world to snatch the sword Dao totem, he must have come fully prepared. He Xiaojun is holding back the Sacred Land's origin energy. That kid is doomed. How can a half-step celestial realm cultivator contend with Bai Xiaojun, let alone Bai Xiaojun who is holding the Bai Fengjian? In a chapter 2143, outside the sword origin world, many people were watching the battle inside anxiously. In the previous battle between Chu Fengyan and Elder Holy Spring, everyone present could see that Chu Fengyan's strength was definitely not that of an ordinary half-step celestial realm martial artist. However, Chu Fengyan was able to suppress Ancestor Holy Spring by relying on the origin power of the sword origin world. He Xiaojun had blocked the origin energy of the origin sword world from the outside. If Chu Fengyan were to face Bai Xiaojun alone, he would undoubtedly die. The people gathered outside the sword origin world still hadn't given up on the sword execution token chart. They were already looking for an opportunity to rush into the sword origin world and snatch the sword execution token chart. As for Chu Fengyan, he was already a dead man in their eyes. He was about to die under Bai Xiaojun's sword. Bai Xiaojun could even kill an immortal general with his sword, let alone Chu Fengyan, a kid who hadn't even passed the sky tribulation. Dying. Bai Xiaojun's face was full of confidence. He smiled confidently when he saw the countless sword qi slashing towards Chu Fengyan. In his opinion, Chu Fengyan's greatest trump card, the origin power of the sword origin world, had already been blocked by He Xiaojun. As for Chu Fengyan, a mere half-step celestial being, he couldn't kill him at will. Boom! However, the moment the countless sword qi slashed Chu Fengyan's body, Chu Fengyan suddenly waved his hand and clawed out. Suddenly, an invisible force condensed in Chu Fengyan's palm. It shrouded the front of Chu Fengyan. All the attacks that were heading towards Chu Fengyan were caught by this invisible force. Chu Fengyan clenched his hand and crushed them all. Chu Fengyan clenched his hand and crushed them. You want to kill me with just this sword qi? Chu Fengyan was still sitting on his throne. He merely raised his hand and crushed all the sword qi with a relaxed expression. Die! Bai Xiaojun was a little surprised to see Chu Fengyan neutralize the sword qi attack so easily. Although he hadn't attacked with his full strength, ordinary immortal generals wouldn't be able to withstand it. Chu Fengyan's strength was more powerful than he had imagined. However, at this time, Bai Xiaojun's heart was still incomparably confident. If he attacked with all his strength, he did not believe that Chu Fengyan, who was only half a step into the celestial realm, could withstand it. The legacy of the Lord of the Sword Dao does have some tricks up its sleeve. I wonder if he'll be able to take it. As soon as Bai Xiaojun spoke, his body vanished without a trace. He transformed into a beam of white light that seemed to fuse with the Bai Feng sword, transforming into a powerful sword qi that slashed toward Chu Fengyan with murderous intent, transforming the body into a sword. No, this is an even higher realm, sword manipulation. Although Master Bai's body has disappeared, all of his power has fused into the Bai Feng sword. He can still control the Bai Feng sword, which is a higher realm. The power of one man and one sword fused into one. This Bai Xiaojun's attainment in the Tao of the sword is already hard to find in the same realm. Young Master Bai once practiced this move bitterly, but he didn't succeed. It seems that he came to the 9 regions this time because of some opportunities allowing him to master this move. Seeing Bai Xiaojun make his move, some people in the crowd muttered to themselves, Bai Xiaojun's sword manipulation became one with the sword. The Bai Feng sword was an extremely sharp sword to begin with, and with the addition of Bai Xiaojun's power, its edge became even sharper. The space of the sword origin world was sliced open by the sword's edge. Star Shatterer. A long howl resounded as boundless immortal force erupted. The Baifeng sword slashed at Chu Fengyan. Space shattered wherever the sword's edge passed, and a long river of void condensed in its wake. This was the sharpness of the sword. Interesting. Chu Fengyan's expression remained incomparably relaxed. With a flip of his hand, the ancestral dragon paragon sword appeared in his palm once more. Then, supreme sword intent burst out from his back and condensed on the sword's edge. Chu Fengyan held the ancestral dragon paragon sword and pointed it at the incoming Baifeng sword. Is he trying to take the Baifeng sword head-on? Bai Shaojuan's sword can only be dodged. He can't take it head-on. The Baifeng sword is an extremely sharp sword, and with Bai Shaojuan's current strength, taking it head-on is certain death. Looks like this kid hasn't seen the power of the Baifeng sword. If he takes it head-on, he'll only end up with his sword destroyed and his death. Outside the sword origin world, some people shook their heads when they saw this scene. However, there were even more experts who didn't speak. They were all accumulating their strength, preparing to take action and snatch the upper sword execution order chart the moment Chu Fengyan died, and the upper sword execution order chart disintegrated into countless objects. Bang! In an instant, the Baifeng sword had already cut through space and slashed at Chu Fengyan's head. This sword was definitely a killing move. It was aimed to take Chu Fengyan's life. At the same time, Chu Fengyan raised the ancestral dragon paragon sword in his hand and slashed out, colliding with the Baifeng sword. 9 domains. The power of the 9 domains sword art flowed out of Chu Fengyan's body and infused the ancestral dragon paragon sword's blade. The power of the ancestral dragon paragon sword was frantically stimulated as it clashed with the Baifeng sword. Crash! Countless spaces around Chu Fengyan had already shattered. The entire sword origin world seemed to be on the verge of being torn apart by the collision of the two swords. Not good. In Cloud Feather Palace, Han Yueli, Luo Shi, and the others were all prepared to take action and repair the space around the sword origin world. However, the life seal suddenly appeared in front of Chu Fengyan. As the power of space erupted from the life seal, the entire sword origin world was enveloped within it. The shattered space was completely repaired. Chu Fengyan had long known that the successive battles in the sword origin world could affect the sword origin world. Therefore, he had used the power of the life seal to protect the sword origin world in advance. At the same time, a figure was sitting quietly inside the life seal. An endless amount of immortal force was emitted from the figure, reinforcing the life seal. It was this figure that was using his own immortal energy to support the life seal and protect the sword origin world. Is that Ancestor Holy Spring? This figure was no stranger to the crowd. It was Ancestor Holy Spring, who had been suppressed by Chu Fengyan under the life seal. In a short period of time, Ancestor Holy Spring had been subdued by Chu Fengyan and was willing to expend his own energy to support the life seal and protect the sword origin world. End of chapter. Chapter 2144. This man's means are much more powerful than we imagined. Many people were shocked to see that Ancestor Holy Spring had been subdued. They had witnessed old Ancestor Holy Spring being subdued by Chu Fengyan in such a short period of time. They were shocked to see old Ancestor Holy Spring being subdued by Chu Fengyan. Suppressing an immortal general didn't mean that one could subdue an immortal general. It should be known that an immortal general expert had experienced countless life and death battles and obtained countless opportunities. They definitely had a few trump cards in their hands. It was almost impossible to subdue an immortal general expert. Although Ancestor Holy Spring had been subdued by Chu Fengyan, they believed that Chu Fengyan would have to go through a lot of trouble if he wanted to subdue Ancestor Holy Spring. But now, Ancestor Holy Spring was sitting in the Life Great Seal and was willing to consume his immortal energy to maintain the power of the seal. This was simply a matter of self-sacrifice. Such a situation could only happen if Ancestor Holy Spring was subdued by Chu Fengyan. Silently, Chu Fengyan had subdued Ancestor Sacred Spring. This was beyond their imagination. They realized that they had underestimated Chu Fengyan from the very beginning. Since Chu Fengmian dared to take out the sword and force her token portrait, he naturally wasn't afraid of anyone snatching it away. The Holy Land has been defended, but the power of this immortal weapon is protecting the Holy Land. Without the power of this immortal weapon, I'm afraid it's even more impossible for him to fight against Bai Shaojun. Leaving the Holy Land behind and perishing will be like drawing water with a bamboo basket. It's meaningless. Outside the sword origin world, an old man sneered. This old man was a good friend of Ancestor Holy Spring. His face turned ugly when he saw Ancestor Holy Spring being subdued by Chu Fengmian. His eyes were full of resentment as he looked at Chu Fengmian. That's right. Maintaining the power to protect the Holy Land at this time is a little too arrogant. The other powerhouses beside him also agreed with the elder's words. They could see that the life seal was also an extremely powerful immortal weapon. If it was in Chu Fengmian's hands, it would be a great help to Chu Fengmian. The reason why Chu Fengmian was able to easily suppress Old Ancestor Holy Spring was not only because of the origin energy of the sword origin world, but also because of the life seal. But now, Chu Fengmian didn't use the life seal to fight Bai Shaojun. Instead, he used it to protect the sword origin world. In everyone's eyes, Chu Fengmian was being too careless. It was equivalent to Chu Fengmian losing the help of an immortal weapon for no reason in this battle. Just watch, that brat is dead for sure. The old man who had sneered earlier spoke again. Everyone's gaze fell on the center of the collision between the two swords. Rumble. The moment the two swords collided, sword intent erupted from Chu Fengmian's body and soared into the sky. This sword intent was so strong that it enveloped the entire sword origin world. The entire world was enveloped by this sword will. This sword will was so strong that it could affect a minor world. In fact, this sword will was something that would never change. Everyone felt that this sword intent wouldn't fade, even after tens of millions of years. It would continue to exist within the sword origin world. This kind of sword intent was enough to make countless sword Dao experts feel shocked. Even they had never seen such a powerful sword intent. The strength of this sword intent was beyond their imagination. The pinnacle of sword Dao. This is the sword intent of the pinnacle of sword God. How is this possible? Some sword Dao experts were stunned when they saw the sword will. They were shocked to the extreme and blinked their eyes to confirm the sword will again and again. But no matter how many times they confirmed, this sword intent still erupted from Chu Fengmian's body. This is a sword intent that is infinitely close to the origin of sword Dao. It is said that this is the level of the master of sword Dao. How is this possible? This person is the master of sword Dao. Isn't the master of sword Dao dead? No, he can't be the master of sword Dao. If he was, he could have killed Bai Shaojun in the blink of an eye. The master of sword Dao is an existence that surpasses the immortal emperor realm. He is invincible. But this sword intent? It's very likely that this person has inherited the legacy of the master of sword Dao and also a part of his sword intent. The master of sword Dao is an invincible existence that surpasses the immortal emperor realm. His sword intent has existed since ancient times and will never fade away. An old man speculated. The sword intent of the master of sword Dao. Invincible sword intent. No wonder this person is so confident. He still has such a trump card. Many people felt that the old man's speculation was correct. In their opinion, this sword intent definitely didn't belong to Chu Fengmian. The Sword Dao sect claimed to have inherited the legacy of the master of sword Dao. It made sense that Chu Fengmian had obtained the sword intent of the master of sword Dao. Buzz. While everyone was still speculating, the result of the collision of the two swords was decided. The sword intent let out a long cry. All of the sword intent that erupted from Chu Fengmian's back was finally integrated into his sword. He slashed out with a loud bang. There was nothing fancy about this slash. There was no sword technique involved. It was just a pure sword technique. However, the profoundness of this sword technique surpassed that of an immortal sword technique. This slash collided with Bai Shaojun's sword incarnation. Suddenly, a figure was sent flying. The moment this figure flew out, he coughed up blood and was sent flying. This figure was none other than Bai Xiaojun. Now he was sent flying and coughing up blood. The collision of the two swords had seriously injured him. Bai Xiaojun was defeated by the sword incarnation's strongest slash. The people outside the origin sword world weren't too surprised to see this result. From a moment, the terrifying sword intent rose from Chu Fengmian's back. They had expected this result. No matter how strong Bai Xiaojun was, he wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow from that sword intent. If Bai Xiaojun wasn't a sword cultivator, there might be some suspense in this battle. However, Bai Xiaojun was a sword cultivator. In a battle between sword cultivators, sword Dao reigned supreme. Chu Fengmian's slash contained invincible sword intent. The result of this battle was no surprise. Bai Xiaojun fell outside Cloud Feather Palace. Bai Fengjian was sent flying as well. This sword isn't bad. It's mine. Chu Fengmian glanced at Bai Fengjian. With a wave of his hand, a formless hand appeared and grabbed at Bai Fengjian. Bai Fengjian fell into Chu Fengmian's hand and burst out with a sharp light, trying to escape from Chu Fengmian's grasp. Still trying to escape? Chu Fengmian sneered. A supreme sword intent shrouded Bai Fengjian, suppressing the power of Bai Fengjian. At the same time, Chu Fengmian activated the ancient emperor's art of war with a thought. Bai Xiaojun's mark on Bai Fengjian was instantly dissolved. End of chapter. Chapter 2145. That's the White Feng sword. It's in his hands. Many experts outside the origin sword world revealed greedy looks when they saw the White Feng sword in Chu Fengmian's hands. They wanted to snatch the sword. The White Feng sword was the supreme treasure of the White Sword sect. Everyone knew how powerful it was. But now that it was in Chu Fengmian's hands, those greedy eyes all retracted when they looked at Chu Fengmian. When the White Feng sword was in Bai Xiaojun's hands, none of them dared to snatch it. Now that Bai Xiaojun was defeated by Chu Fengmian, they didn't dare to snatch it from him. The Black and White Xiaojun are going to die here. Some of the crowd said when they saw Bai Xiaojun's defeat. You can't blame the Black and White Xiaojun. They even brought out the supreme treasure of the Black and White Sword sect. It's a pity that they didn't expect Chu Fengmian to possess the invincible sword intent of the Sword Dao Lord. This kid has hidden his trump card so well. He actually revealed it just now. Many eyes looked at Chu Fengmian. Many experts outside the origin sword world rejoiced that they didn't snatch the upper sword execution illustration before the Black and White Xiaojun did. Otherwise, they would be the ones to suffer. The White Xiaojun was defeated and seriously injured. Only the Black Xiaojun was left. He had no chance of resisting. Let's go. The White Xiaojun flew out of the Cloud Feather Palace and shouted at the Black Xiaojun. The Black Xiaojun was still fighting against the origin energy of the origin sword world. When he heard the White Xiaojun's words, he quickly pulled himself out and took the White Xiaojun to the sky, preparing to leave the origin sword world. The Black and White Xiaojun's plan was for the Black Xiaojun to delay the origin energy of the origin sword world, while the White Xiaojun took action to kill Chu Fengmian and snatch the upper sword execution illustration. But now, their plan was completely ruined. No one had expected Chu Fengmian to be able to defeat the White Xiaojun. The Black Xiaojun was the same. He also understood that they were bound to lose this battle. Their only chance was to escape the origin sword world. Chu Fengmian was within the origin sword world. With the support of the origin energy of the origin sword world, not many people dared to charge into the origin sword world to fight Chu Fengmian. However, the moment Chu Fengmian left the origin sword world, he would most likely be besieged by the experts waiting outside. As long as they could leave the origin sword world, they still had a chance to escape. In an instant, Bai Xiaojun understood everything. Endless dark power erupted from his body as his figure entered the darkness and rushed out of the origin sword world. Escape? Now that he was in the sword origin world, there was no need for him to leave. Life seal. The power of origin. Stop them. Chu Fengmian was still sitting on the throne in the Cloud Feather Palace. He didn't chase after them. Instead, he looked at the Black and White lords who were about to escape and sneered. The Great Life Seal soared into the sky. Under the power of the Great Life Seal, the entire space of the origin sword world was suddenly isolated and sealed. At the same time, The origin energy of the origin energy of the origin sword world turned into rainbow light and appeared in the sky. Rays of rainbow light gathered together to form chains. There were thousands of chains formed by the rainbow-colored light, and the entire sword origin world was locked down by these chains. In an instant, the entire sword origin world was sealed off. The origin energy of the origin energy of the origin sword world alone was comparable to the combined power of several immortal generals. In addition, the Great Life Seal, an immortal artifact that could suppress space, was activated together to seal the space. The darkness that He Xiaojun had transformed into was stopped by a force when he approached the edge of the origin sword world. He couldn't break through this space at all. He Xiaojun, it's over. Seeing this scene, the experts outside the origin sword world knew that He Xiaojun and He Xiaojun would definitely die this time. The two of them had no chance of escaping at all. If He Xiaojun hadn't been injured, the two of them might have had a chance of breaking through this space seal. However, He Xiaojun was the only one left with by Xiaojun severely injured. The chances of them breaking through this space seal were extremely slim. He Xiaojun's escape light came to a stop. His body slowly condensed. His face was extremely pale. He knew his end. Let's fight. Bai Xiaojun forced himself to stand up and looked in Chu Fengyan's direction. His eyes were filled with fighting spirit as he took a deep breath and said, "So what if we die in battle? There are no cowards in the black and white sword sect." Bai Xiaojun also knew that their chances of escaping this time were extremely slim. Rather than being chased to death by Chu Fengyan, they'd rather fight to the death. Fight! He Xiaojun's eyes were filled with boundless fighting spirit when he heard Bai Xiaojun's words. The fear in his eyes was swept away. He Xiaojun and He Xiaojun were famous experts in the extraterrestrial starry sky. They were both immortal generals. If the two of them were willing to submit today, they might still have a chance of survival. However, the two of them weren't willing to live. Instead of begging for mercy, they'd rather fight to the death. Both of their eyes were fixed on Chu Fengyan. Their eyes were filled with endless fighting spirit. They were ready to fight to the death. Not bad. With your fighting spirit, I'll let you two take out your swords first. Chu Fengyan sat on the throne and said the moment he saw the fighting spirit. Sword! Bai Xiaojun and He Xiaojun shouted at the same time. Both of them unleashed the sword intent that they had accumulated throughout their lives. At the same time, both of them coughed out large mouthfuls of blood. The blood stained the blade of their swords. Bai Xiaojun took out a new spiritual sword after losing the Bai Feng sword. Although it wasn't as good as the Bai Feng sword, it was still an immortal spiritual sword. Bai Xiaojun and He Xiaojun's faces turned even paler when they coughed out the blood. It wasn't blood, but their life essence blood. It represented their confidence in fighting to the death. Black and white infinity. Two figures soared into the sky, one black and one white. Their sword intent erupted and condensed in the sky, forming an yin-yang formation diagram. This black and white infinity was the strongest move of the black and white sword sect. It was also a desperate move. The moment the yin-yang formation diagram was formed, it came crashing down. He Xiaojun and Bai Xiaojun's sword intent gushed out endlessly, as if they wanted to pour all of their power into the yin-yang formation diagram. The yin-yang formation diagram fell from the sky with boundless power. It had the power to crush the heavens and shatter the earth. Black and white infinity, the black and white sword sect's desperate sword. Strong. This sword will definitely kill an immortal general and injure an immortal marquis. Even some sword path powerhouses who had some grudges with the black-white young lord were certain that this sword was the strongest sword of an era. End of chapter. Chapter 2146. From this sword, one could tell that the black and white sword sect's reputation as a hegemon wasn't undeserved. I wonder if this sword can contend against the Lord of the Sword Dao's invincible sword will. Many experts outside the origin sword world muttered to themselves when they saw the black and white lord's everlasting black and white. They had thought that the black and white lord would definitely die this time. However, the power of the black and white everlasting black and white was much stronger than they had imagined. They wanted to see if the Lord of the Sword Dao's invincible sword was stronger, or if the black and white sword sect's strongest sword was stronger. Boom! Boom! In an instant, as the yin-yang matrix descended, countless blades slashed down, heading straight for Chu Fengyan. At this moment, the entire Origin Sword world shook. If the power of this sword landed on the Origin Sword world, the Origin Sword world wouldn't be able to withstand it. Good. This sword is worthy of my full strength. Chu Fengyan revealed a look of joy in the face of the black and white, everlasting black and white. The sword edge in his hand suddenly flickered and turned into an invincible sword that soared into the sky. The power of this sword was incomparably domineering. All of the sword will condensed into the sword edge and turned into a domineering sword. 9 domains sky-splitting. The first sword technique of the 9-domain sword technique that Chu Fengyan had condensed from the ancient sword Dao book erupted at this moment. The moment this sword burst out, the power of all the sword techniques recorded in the ancient sword Dao book was activated at the same time and integrated into this sword. This sword could be said to be the strongest sword technique that Chu Fengyan had ever created. The power of this sword could sweep across the heavens and myriad worlds. Under this sword, it seemed as if the heavens and earth would be torn apart. The power of the 2 words sky-splitting was vividly displayed. The sword edge of this sky-splitting sword soared into the sky and slashed into the black and white, everlasting black and white. Countless sword edges collided within, and in the next moment, the countless sword edges within the black and white, everlasting black and white shattered with a loud bang. The yin-yang formation diagram, formed by the black and white, everlasting black and white, was split into 2 by this sword, and its power dissipated completely. Boom! The black and white, everlasting sword was broken. Both the black and white lords had to bear the brunt of the sword that split the sky. Their bodies were instantly torn apart, and the power of the sword ended. Only a cloud of blood was left in the air. He Xiao Jun and Bai Xiao Jun, 2 immortal generals, were killed by this sword. The blood mist was completely devoured by Chu Fengyan's sky-devouring secret technique. Both young Master He and young Master Bai were peak figures among immortal generals. Their blood essence was no less than that of the Tianxing Jindi that Chu Fengyan had devoured. A large amount of immortal energy surged into Chu Fengyan's body, increasing his strength. His aura grew stronger and stronger. I still can't. The power of Chu Fengyan's sword had stunned everyone. It wasn't until Chu Fengyan had completely devoured the essence blood of the black and white master that many people came back to their senses. They muttered to themselves after witnessing this scene. The Lord of the Sword Dao is indeed an invincible existence. Even the sword he left behind isn't something that the black and white lords can challenge. An old man murmured to himself. Chu Fengyan's sword strike was so terrifying that they could only think of the Lord of the Sword Dao's sword will. The only possibility was that Chu Fengyan had borrowed the Lord of the Sword Dao's sword to unleash such a terrifying sword strike. Apart from that, there was no other possibility. Even the experts who had doubted this point had no more doubts after witnessing the power of the sword strike. Given Chu Fengyan's half-step celestial realm cultivation, he could only unleash such a terrifying sword strike with the help of the Lord of the Sword Dao's sword will. What a lucky kid. No matter how much he consumes the Lord of the Sword Dao's sword will, it will be exhausted sooner or later. When that time comes, I'll be able to crush a puny half-step celestial realm ant to death. An immortal general stared at Chu Fengyan and said coldly. He looked at Chu Fengyan with incomparable jealousy. The Lord of the Sword Dao's sword was a supreme treasure that was even more precious than an immortal weapon. Yet, Chu Fengyan had obtained it. If he had obtained it, he didn't know how many experts he could defeat with the Lord of the Sword Dao's sword will. Moreover, Chu Fengyan was only half-step celestial realm. In his eyes, Chu Fengyan was just an ant. How could he not be jealous that he had such an opportunity? That's in the future. Before the sword dissipates, no immortal general will be a match for him. An immortal general beside him snorted coldly. It's just a wisp of sword will. How many more times can this kid activate it? In my opinion, if we join forces to kill him now, his sword won't be able to withstand it at all. The immortal general, who was incomparably jealous just now, said coldly, "What? Black bamboo, old ancestor. Do you plan to make the first move? This sword will indeed won't last long, but no one is willing to throw their lives away. With this sword it won't be a problem for this person to kill a few more immortal generals." Another immortal general said with a sneer, "I have no objections if you're willing to throw your life away and exhaust the sword will. But if you want us to throw our lives away, then forget it." Umph. Black bamboo, old ancestor, could only snort coldly when he heard the mocking voice. He took a deep look at Chu Fengmian and left in a flash of light. He knew very well that Chu Fengmian was almost invincible with the Lord of the Sword Dao's sword will. No immortal general would be willing to take the initiative to fight with Chu Fengmian. The black-white young lord's fate was still there. Many of them were far inferior to the black-white young lord in strength. Who would be willing to provoke him? This time, many experts outside the origin world who wanted to spy on the sword execution chart in Chu Fengmian's hand left one after another. They had decided to give up. Even the remaining people had no intention of making a move. After killing the black-white young lord, Chu Fengmian had truly established his prestige. The Lord of the Sword Dao's sword will? In Cloud Feather Palace, Chu Fengmian was still sitting on the throne. The battle just now hadn't caused him to get up, but he was still in Cloud Feather Palace. Everything that happened outside the origin sword world couldn't be hidden from Chu Fengmian's spiritual sense. Chu Fengmian also heard the conversation between the immortal generals and experts. A faint smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. Everyone thought that Chu Fengmian's shocking sword will was because he had obtained the Lord of the Sword Dao's sword will. The sword technique he had unleashed was also because of the Lord of the Sword Dao's sword will. End of chapter. Chapter 21:47. But in fact, only Chu Fengmian knew that this sword intent actually belonged to Chu Fengmian himself. It had nothing to do with the master of the Sword Dao. In terms of sword comprehension, Chu Fengmian might not be inferior to his master, the master of the Sword Dao. In his previous life, although he had shown amazing talent in sword principles, he did not have a spiritual pulse and could not cultivate. In the extraterritorial starry sky, no one knew the name of the sword genius Chu Jianbai in his previous life. Therefore, they guessed for a long time, and all their guesses revolved around the master of the Sword Dao. However, Chu Fengmian was happy to accept such a conjecture. After all, Chu Fengmian was able to display such a sword intent as a half-step celestial being, and it was extremely likely that he would be targeted by some experts. In the current 9 regions, immortal generals were the overlords of a region. In fact, there were experts who had surpassed the immortal general realm. There were also some Xiantian realm experts hidden in the 9 regions. However, such experts were the giants of a force and would not easily show themselves. Chu Fengmian knew that the founder of the 100 Territories Alliance was a Xiantian realm immortal marquis. Now that Chu Fengmian had created the Sky Splitter Sword technique, he could defeat all immortal generals with this move. However, Chu Fengmian did not have any confidence in facing a Xiantian realm immortal marquis. Chu Fengmian had only felt a wisp of immortal marquis's aura in the Xiantian hidden treasure when he was about to leave. However, Chu Fengmian still remembered how powerful that wisp of aura was. Chu Fengmian did not want to face an immortal general before he was confident. After today's battle, the news that Chu Fengmian had the master of the Sword Dao sword intent would definitely spread. It would cover up Chu Fengmian's own sword intent. Chu Fengmian did not need to think too much about his next attack. In this battle, after subduing Old Ancestor Holy Spring and killing Black and White Young Lord, Chu Fengmian's strength had become famous in the 9 regions. The upper sword execution order chart was in Chu Fengmian's hands. There would not be many people who would dare to snatch it, although it could not be said that everyone had given up on this idea. However, before they found a way to deal with Chu Fengmian's sword intent, they would definitely not act rashly. It should be quieter in the next few days. In another 4 days, the Upper Sword Sect's ruins would be opened. On the 5th day of the 12th month, everything would be settled. Mad Dragon Emperor. Chu Fengmian suddenly looked at the Mad Dragon Emperor. Sovereign, The Mad Dragon Emperor respectfully came before Chu Fengmian and bowed. The first elder of the Shengquan sect had already been killed by the Mad Dragon Emperor Luo Shi and Han Yueli when Chu Fengmian was fighting the Black and White Young Lords. His head was still in the Mad Dragon Emperor's hand as he spoke to Chu Fengmian. This person has already fallen. Well done, Mad Dragon Emperor. Although you haven't been with me for long, you've done your best for the Sword Dao sect. I'll give you this Bai Feng sword. Chu Fengmian nodded and waved his hand. The Bai Feng sword flew from Chu Fengmian's hand to the Mad Dragon Emperor. Although the Bai Feng sword was of the same grade as the Ancestral Dragon Paragon sword, the Ancestral Dragon Paragon sword was more suitable for Chu Fengmian. After all, Chu Fengmian had controlled the origin of dragons. The dragon sword created by Dragon Emperor Yen Gu was the most suitable spiritual sword for Chu Fengmian. Moreover, the Ancestral Dragon Paragon sword had been with Chu Fengmian for a long time. It had been with Chu Fengmian since he was weak and had transformed time and time again. It had been tainted by Chu Fengmian's power. As Chu Fengmian grew stronger, the Ancestral Dragon Paragon sword also had the possibility of evolving. In the future, the Ancestral Dragon Paragon sword might even transform into an extreme immortal weapon. Its future was boundless. Therefore, Chu Fengmian naturally had to keep the Ancestral Dragon Paragon sword. Many of the extreme Dao immortal weapons in history were not born as extreme Dao immortal weapons. Many extreme Dao immortal weapons started as small spiritual weapons and evolved step by step until they finally became extreme Dao immortal weapons. Just like the human emperor jar, it evolved step by step with the rise of the human emperor. It evolved time and time again before it finally became an extreme immortal weapon. Chu Fengmian also wanted to evolve the Ancestral Dragon Paragon sword into an extreme immortal weapon. This was the most suitable sword for Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian had no use for the Bai Feng sword. Han Yueli and Luo Shi both had immortal weapons. Among the Sword Dao sect's Sky Realm experts, only the Mad Dragon Emperor didn't have an immortal weapon. Thank you, Sect Master. The Mad Dragon Emperor was overjoyed. With his strength and the Bai Feng sword, it was definitely enough to kill an immortal warrior demon immortal. The Mad Dragon Emperor had accumulated strength during the 10,000 years of fighting against the heaven-defying tribulation. Therefore, after stepping into the Sky Realm, his strength had also improved by leaps and bounds. Now, he had vaguely reached the immortal warrior realm. This Bai Feng sword was no ordinary immortal weapon. It was one of the sect treasures of the Black and White Sword sect. With the Bai Feng sword in hand, even if he were to bump into some immortal warriors with immortal weapons, the Mad Dragon Emperor would be able to kill them. Even if he encountered some immortal generals without immortal weapons, the Mad Dragon Emperor could contend with them. Of the two supreme spiritual swords of the Black and White Lord, the Bai Feng sword was given to the Mad Dragon Emperor. The other 7 knights' sword was kept in the empty ring by Chu Fengmian. Unless one was a monster like Chu Fengmian, only Sky Realm martial artists were qualified to use immortal weapons. For ordinary half-step Sky Realm martial artists, if they used immortal weapons, they wouldn't even have a chance to fight the enemy. The immortal weapon would directly drain their spiritual power. In the Sword Dao sect, there was no 4th expert in the celestial realm. Although Qing Meng, Emperor Yin, and the others were much stronger than ordinary half-step celestial realm experts and could be called geniuses, they were still far from being able to control fairy artifacts. This is the 7 Knights' sword. I will bestow the 7 Knights' sword to whoever is the first to step into the heaven realm. Chu Fengmian looked at the crowd below and said with a smile. Chu Fengmian wasn't a stingy person. The 7 Knights' sword didn't have much meaning in the hands of Chu Fengmian. It would be better to give it to encourage the cultivation of the Sword Dao sect. Sure enough, after hearing Chu Fengmian's words, Qing Meng, Emperor Yin, and the others showed some excitement on their faces. They could all see the power of the 7 Knights' sword. It was definitely much more powerful than ordinary immortal weapons. For most of the martial artists and demon immortals who had just stepped into the Sky Realm, getting an immortal weapon was definitely an extremely lucky thing. More than 90% of the immortal warriors didn't have an immortal weapon. In the immortal warrior realm, the number of martial artists who had an immortal weapon was at most about 50%. Only after stepping into the immortal general realm could it be said that almost everyone had an immortal weapon. End of chapter. Chapter 2148. If a newly ascended celestial realm expert could obtain an immortal weapon, his strength would be at the peak of the celestial realm, even if he had just broken through. This made Green Dream and the others, who were not far away from the celestial tribulation, eager to be the first to ascend to the celestial realm. Sect Master, how do you plan to deal with the Shangquan sect and the Black and White Sword sect? At that instant, the Sword Slayer Emperor suddenly spoke. The death of Ancestor Holy Spring and the Black and White Masters had broken the pillars of the two sections. It was a good opportunity to deal with them. The Black and White Sword sect was fine. Although their two strongest experts, the Black and White Masters, had died, there were still more than a dozen Celestial Realm experts. Even among the countless forces in the 9 regions, they were not considered weak. However, the Shangquan sect was not so lucky. 2 of the 3 Celestial Realm experts in the Shangquan sect died in the Shangquan sect. Only the sect master of the Shangquan sect was left. Mad Dragon Emperor, you have gone to destroy the Shangquan sect. I don't want to see the Shangquan sect before tomorrow's sunrise. Chu Fengyan said coldly. Yes, master, Mad Dragon Emperor said respectfully and turned to leave. He left the Origin Sword world and flew directly in the direction of the Shangquan sect. Mad Dragon Emperor had just been rewarded with the White Sword. Today, he would use the Shangquan sect as an offering to the sword. As for the Black and White Sword sect, forget it. The Black and White Masters were a pair. With their deaths, the grudges with the Black and White Sword sect will be written off. Chu Fengyan said slowly. Chu Fengyan didn't have much hatred for the Black and White Sword sect. The Black and White Masters were straightforward and upright, completely different from the hypocrite ancestor Holy Spring. In the end, they fought to the death and deserved Chu Fengyan's respect. Although the Black and White Sword sect only had a dozen Celestial Realm experts left, Chu Fengyan could still easily destroy them if he wanted to. But considering the Black and White Masters resolved to fight to the death, Chu Fengyan didn't intend to make things difficult for the Black and White Sword sect. Yes, the Sword Slayer King retreated and stood respectfully at the side. It might be difficult for the Dragon Emperor to fight against the entire Shangquan sect alone. Why don't I give him a hand? Luo, she said hesitantly as she watched the departing figure of the Mad Dragon Emperor. Although Ancestor Holy Spring, the patriarch of the Shangquan sect, had been subdued by Chu Fengyan, there was still an expert in the celestial being realm in the Shangquan sect. It was still a bit dangerous for the Mad Dragon Emperor to create the Shangquan sect alone. No need. This battle is also a trial for the Dragon Emperor. With Bai Fengjian's strength, he can destroy the Shangquan sect. Chu Fengyan shook his head. Chu Fengyan didn't want to do it himself because he wanted to train Kuang Long Emperor. After all, Chu Fengyan couldn't be in Sword Dao sect all the time. In the future, Sword Dao sect could only rely on themselves. The only thing Chu Fengyan could do was leave behind his immortal items to build his holy land. One day, Chu Fengyan would leave. 3 Saint Domains. This was where Chu Fengyan was going to go in the future. Originally, Chu Fengyan had planned to head to the 3 great sacred realms after returning to the 9 regions. However, since he had obtained the Shang Sword Enforcer token chart by chance, Chu Fengyan's plan was to compete for the Shang Sword sect's inheritance before heading to the 3 great sacred realms. When Chu Fengyan went to the 3 Saint Domains, Sword Dao sect could only rely on themselves if they wanted to establish a foothold in the 9 domains. Calculating the time, the other upper sword execution tokens should have appeared in the next 2 days. Chu Fengyan muttered to himself. There were a total of 12 upper sword execution tokens. Since one of them had appeared, the remaining 11 should also appear in the next few days. Just as Chu Fengyan was muttering to himself, a shocking sword intent burst out. This burst of sword intent shot straight into the 9 heavens. It wasn't just in the 9 regions. Even in the small world around the 9 regions, in the Origin Sword world, Chu Fengyan could clearly see this sword intent shooting into the sky. Another upper sword execution token chart has appeared. Chu Fengmian was naturally very familiar with the appearance of this sword intent. It was the news of the upper sword execution token chart's appearance. The upper sword enforcer token chart would only appear when it recognized an owner. Therefore, when some sword cultivators obtain the upper sword enforcer token chart, they might not recognize it as the upper sword enforcer token chart. Take Tianxing Jiandi, for example. Although they had obtained the upper sword execution token chart, they had only treated it as an ordinary ancient diagram. Following the commotion caused by the appearance of the upper sword execution token chart in Chu Fengmian's hands, sword cultivators who had obtained similar enlightenment would carefully identify it. Naturally, more and more upper sword execution tokens would appear. In the next half a day, Chu Fengmian sensed the appearance of 4 upper sword execution tokens, including the upper sword execution token chart in Chu Fengmian's hands and the one that had appeared before. Half of the 12 upper sword execution tokens had already appeared. The remaining upper sword execution token chart was not far away from being born. In the past, the upper sword sect had created the upper sword execution token chart for the sake of competition between sword cultivators in the 9 domains. Therefore, once an upper sword execution token chart appeared, the sword intent that would erupt would definitely be unstoppable. It could be easily felt in the entire 9 domains. As more and more upper sword execution portraits appeared, the competition for the upper sword execution portraits became more intense. Any sword cultivator would want to obtain the unparalleled sword techniques of the upper sword sect. After all, the upper sword sect was the most ancient sword sect. The value of its inheritance was known to all. Chu Fengmian, who was overseeing the sword origin realm, could clearly sense what was happening in the 9 domains. 2 of the upper sword enforcer token diagrams had already changed owners in this half a day. Clearly, the sword cultivators who obtained these 2 upper sword enforcer token diagrams had been surrounded and killed or had given up on the upper sword enforcer token diagrams. Although the upper sword execution token chart was related to the inheritance of the upper sword sect, obtaining the upper sword execution token chart wasn't necessarily a good thing. If one's strength was insufficient, obtaining the upper sword execution token chart could only lead to a fatal disaster. Take Chu Fengmian, for example. If he hadn't been strong enough, he would have died at the hands of Ancestor Holy Spring or the Black-White Young Masters. It's a pity that the sword intent on the Taichu sword still needs at least half a month to completely dissolve. If I could control the Taichu sword, my chances of obtaining the upper sword execution token chart would be much greater. Chu Fengmian muttered to himself with some pity. The Taichu sword was an extreme immortal weapon. It had once been the spirit sword of the first sword emperor. Just the words extreme immortal weapon alone were enough to illustrate the power of the Taichu sword. Chapter 2149. Although Chu Fengmian had yet to step into the celestial realm, his current strength was already on par with immortal generals. It shouldn't be a problem for him to control the Taichu sword. With his current strength and control of the Taichu sword, Chu Fengmian was confident that he could fight even profound heaven realm immortal marquises. Chu Fengmian was well aware of the power of an extreme immortal weapon. The Emperor Jar, in Chu Fengmian's hand, was an extreme immortal weapon. Although it was an incomplete extreme immortal weapon, its powers still surpassed most immortal weapons. Compared to the Emperor Jar, the Taichu sword was a complete extreme immortal weapon. Both its blade and hilt were in Chu Fengmian's possession. As long as the demonic intent on the Taichu sword was completely dispelled, he would be able to reconstruct it. Unfortunately, it would take at least half a month for the demonic intent to be completely dispelled. The upper sword sect's ruins would open in 4 days. He wouldn't be able to make it in time to compete for the upper sword sect's inheritance. However, even without the Taichu sword, Chu Fengmian was confident that he could compete for the upper sword sect's inheritance. His current strength was enough to sweep away immortal generals. More importantly, the warriors and Fey immortals who went to fight for the upper sword sect ruins were all sword cultivators without exception. If one was not a sword cultivator with an extremely high understanding of the way of the sword, one would not have the chance to obtain the inheritance of the upper sword sect. Strength was only one of the factors in a clash between sword cultivators. Comprehension of sword Dao and the clash of sword intents were the most important factors. Chu Fengyan had the confidence to fight against sword cultivators, even profound heaven realm immortal marquis. His sword intent was enough to sweep through all profound heaven realm sword cultivators. Although Chu Fengyan's strength hadn't reached the profound heaven realm, his sword intent could make up for it. This was also why he was confident in competing for the upper sword sect's inheritance. Chu Fengyan sat in Cloud Feather Palace with his eyes closed, comprehending the sword technique. The battle with the monochrome young lord had been the first time he'd used Sky Splitter of the Nine Realm sword art. He'd also gained some insight from that battle. In these 4 days, Chu Fengyan prepared to further refine his sword technique. 1 day later, a blood-soaked figure descended upon the Origin sword world. His clothes were tattered, and it was unknown how much blood he had been soaked in. His entire being looked like a bloody man. The figure stepped into the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace, came before the throne, and bowed respectfully. Sectmaster, the Shunquan sect has been destroyed. This figure was none other than the Mad Dragon Emperor. On this day, the Mad Dragon Emperor rushed into the headquarters of the Shunquan sect and destroyed the whole Shunquan sect. He was holding a head in his hand, which was the head of the celestial being Realm Master of the Shunquan sect. Not bad. Chu Fengyan's eyes, which were sitting on the throne, suddenly opened and looked at the Mad Dragon Emperor. During this day, the aura on the Wild Dragon Emperor's body was much more overbearing than before. His strength was also completely different. A breakthrough? Chu Fengyan asked. He could see that the Mad Dragon Emperor had broken through from the immortal realm to the immortal warrior realm. The Mad Dragon Emperor's realm had been at the peak of the immortal realm for a long time, and he was looking for an opportunity to break through. This time, he finally comprehended something in the bloody battle with the Shunquan sect and stepped into the immortal warrior realm. I have comprehended something in this battle, the Mad Dragon Emperor said with a joyful face. You've worked hard. Take a rest first. Chu Fengyan looked at the Mad Dragon Emperor and said. The Mad Dragon Emperor's body was also heavily injured. Clearly, this battle was incomparably dangerous. Even though he was holding the Bai Feng sword, the Mad Dragon Emperor was injured. After all, the Sectmaster of the Shunquan sect was a celestial being realm expert. In addition, if the Shunquan sect wanted to establish a sect in the 9 regions, they must have built a sect and set up countless restrictive formations in it. The Mad Dragon Emperor rashly barged in and faced the strength of the entire Shunquan sect. But in the end, he managed to kill his way out. However, it was also because of this that the Mad Dragon Emperor directly broke through. Yes. Hearing Chu Fengyan's words, the Mad Dragon Emperor turned around and returned to his cave to recuperate in seclusion. On one hand, he wanted to recover from his injuries. On the other hand, he needed to consolidate his strength after breaking through to the immortal warrior realm. In the Cloud Feather Palace, Qing Meng, Yin Hanshi, Emperor Yin, Luo He, and the others were all in seclusion. They were only a step away from the celestial being realm. Chu Fengyan gave them countless sage pills so that they could break through to the celestial being realm at any time. This seclusion was also to accumulate strength and prepare to break through the celestial tribulation. When the 4 of them step into the celestial being realm, the Sword Dao sect will have the ability to protect itself. Chu Fengyan mumbled to himself. In Chu Fengyan's opinion, the Sword Dao sect's strength was still too weak. Excluding Chu Fengyan, there were only Mad Dragon Emperor, Han Yueli, and Luo Shi, the 3 celestial being realm experts. If it was the previous 9 regions, such strength would definitely be enough to become the 8th largest sect in the 9 regions. But now, the 9 regions were full of experts. Almost every sect that dared to establish a sect in the 9 regions had several celestial being realm experts. In the 9 regions, the Sword Dao sect dominated the northern region. It would definitely attract the attention of others. Only by increasing their strength could they protect the Sword Dao sect. When Qing Meng, Yin Hanshi, Emperor Yin, and Luo, he stepped into the celestial being realm, the Sword Dao sect would have a total of 7 celestial being realm experts. It should be enough to protect the Sword Dao sect. Sect Master, the people of Sky Reaching Pavilion are outside the Sword Origin world. They want to see you. After another day, when there was only 1.5 days left before the opening of the Sword Sect ruins, King Swordslayer suddenly came to Cloud Feather Palace and reported to Chu Fumian respectfully. Sky Reaching Pavilion? Chu Fumian's eyes flashed with surprise. Sky Reaching Pavilion was a force of the 9 regions. It was one of the largest chambers of commerce in the 9 regions. Sky Reaching Pavilion, the Inn Under Sky Reaching Pavilion, was the best inn in the 9 regions. Sky Reaching Pavilion would hold auctions every once in a while. Although it wasn't considered a sect, Sky Reaching Pavilion was something that even the 7 great sects of the 9 regions didn't dare to underestimate. Sky Reaching Pavilion had an extremely long history. As early as 10,000 years ago, it was already one of the largest chambers of commerce in the 9 regions. Its origins were incomparably mysterious. First, set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Remember, the bookstore. Chapter 2150. Even Chu Fumian didn't know much about the Sky Reaching Pavilion. However, the Sky Reaching Pavilion only did business and didn't participate in the fights between cultivators. Therefore, Chu Fumian didn't know much about the Sky Reaching Pavilion and had only done some business with them. When Chu Fumian first met Luo Shi, she was in the Sky Reaching Pavilion. However, at that time, she had already obtained the inheritance of the 6 Paths Demon Gate. She was only hiding in the Sky Reaching Pavilion to investigate the secrets of the Sky Reaching Pavilion. I didn't expect the Sky Reaching Pavilion to interfere this time. Chu Fumian originally thought that they were from some sect who also wanted to obtain the Sword Execution token chart. That was why they came to see Chu Fumian under the pretext of paying a visit. Chu Fumian wouldn't have been surprised if someone from the 7 great sects had come to see him at this time. However, Chu Fumian hadn't expected it to be someone from the Sky Penetrating Pavilion. The Sky Reaching Pavilion only cares about benefits. The Upper Sword Enforcer token illustration is a priceless treasure. There's no need to elaborate on the benefits involved. It's not strange for the Sky Reaching Pavilion to interfere. Luo, she said from the side. I'm afraid some experts have asked the Sky Reaching Pavilion to buy the Upper Sword Enforcer token illustration. Interesting. Since they're here, let's meet. Chu Fumian thought for a moment and smiled at the Sword Slayer monarch. Invite them in. Yes. The Sword Slayer king replied and left immediately. Chu Fumian turned his head and looked at Luo Shi. How much do you know about the Sky Reaching Pavilion? Luo, she had joined the Sky Reaching Pavilion before. Her understanding of the Sky Reaching Pavilion should be much better than Chu Fumian. Since the Sky Reaching Pavilion was interfering, Chu Fumian had to be careful. After all, the origin of the Sky Reaching Pavilion was extremely mysterious. Although the Sky Reaching Pavilion mainly did business, Chu Fumian still had to be careful. I only know a little about the origin of the Sky Reaching Pavilion. However, the Sky Reaching Pavilion has a strong foundation. Back then, the 6 Paths Demon Gate didn't dare to clash with the Sky Reaching Pavilion. It's said that the Sky Reaching Pavilion is backed by the Tianjiu domain, just like the 7 major sections. Luo, she said in a deep voice. The Sky Reaching Pavilion isn't as simple as it seems. Is it related to the Tianjiu regions? Chu Fumian's eyes flickered. This was beyond his expectations. Chu Fumian originally thought that in the 9 regions, the only forces related to the 9 regions of heaven were the 7 major sects. But now it seemed that in addition to forces like the Cheetah sect, the Sky Span Pavilion, and even the Heavenly Chamber of Commerce had unfathomable foundations. There were no weaklings among the forces that could continue to exist in the 9 regions. They all had their own foundations. While Chu Fumian and Luo Shi were talking, the Sword Slayer King brought an elder into the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. This time, the person from the Sky Reaching Pavilion did not come with a group of people like the Shunquan sect. Instead, he came alone. It was an old man dressed in luxurious clothes, and his demeanor exuded the aura of someone of high status. He was definitely an important figure in the Pavilion of Transcendence. Chu Fengmian's eyes lit up when he saw this old man. He had seen this old man before. The Sky-Reaching Pavilion was the host of the martial competition in the North region. This old man was Su Qi, an important figure of the Sky-Reaching Pavilion. Previously, when Chu Fengmian killed Yi Tianjun, Yi Mu ancestors suddenly attacked and wanted to kill Chu Fengmian. It was Su Qi who saved Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian still remembered this favor. Greetings, Sword Path Sect Master. Su Qi followed the Sword Slayer monarch and came to the front of the throne. He bowed respectfully to the sect master. Senior Su, you're welcome, Chu Fengmian said with a smile. Su Qi was one of the important figures of the Sky-Reaching Pavilion. In the 9 regions, the major forces of the 9 regions had benefited greatly, and the Sky-Reaching Pavilion was no exception. When Chu Fengmian saw Su Qi, he was still in the life and death steps realm. Now, he had reached the peak of the half-step celestial realm and was only 1 step away from the celestial realm. The drastic changes of the 9 regions and the emergence of countless treasures had also increased the strength of the experts of the 9 regions by leaps and bounds. Although Chu Fengmian's strength was far beyond Su Qi's, Chu Fengmian would not forget the favor from before. Therefore, he still called him senior. I didn't expect the Sword Path Sect Master to still remember this old man. Su Qi was stunned when he heard Chu Fengmian's greeting, but then he said with a smile, "This old man can't afford to be called senior now. I'm now an elder of the Sky-Reaching Pavilion, the 11th elder. If Sect Master doesn't mind, you can call me senior." All right. Chu Fengmian nodded and accepted the greeting. 11th elder? I didn't expect Elder Su to have already entered the Sky-Reaching Council. Luo Shi, who was beside Chu Fengmian, said in surprise when she heard Su Qi's words. Oh, Vice Sect Master Luo knows a lot about the Sky-Reaching Pavilion. Su Qi looked at Luo Shi, who was no stranger to him. In the Sword Path sect, Chu Fengmian was the most mysterious sect master, especially when he had left the 9 regions for the vast sea star field. Han Yueli and Luo Shi were in charge of all the matters of the Sword Path sect. These 2 vice sect masters were extremely famous in the 9 regions. As for Chu Fengmian, he had only made a name for himself 2 days ago when he had subdued Elder Holy Spring and killed the Black and White Lords. Before this, very few cultivators of the 9 regions knew who the Sword Dao School's sect master was. I've only heard some rumors. Luo Shi didn't say much and turned to Chu Fengmian. Now that Elder Su has entered the Sky-Reaching Council, he's a true senior member of the Sky-Reaching Pavilion. He can represent the Sky-Reaching Pavilion. Oh, although Luo Shi's words were simple, Chu Fengmian could tell that the Sky-Reaching Council was the highest level of the Sky-Reaching Pavilion. Although Su Qi's position was high before, he wasn't qualified to join the Sky-Reaching Council. Now that Su Qi had entered the Sky-Reaching Council, he was at the highest level of the Sky-Reaching Pavilion. His position was even higher than that of an elder. This time, the Sky-Reaching Pavilion had sent Su Qi to show their sincerity. Congratulations on your promotion, Elder Su. Chu Fengmian smiled. It seemed that the Sky-Reaching Pavilion had come for Chu Fengmian because of the Sword Enforcer token shard. After all, Chu Fengmian didn't have anything else on him that was worth an elder of the Sky-Reaching Council. I was just lucky. Su Qi smiled. May I know why Elder Su has come this time? Chu Fengmian changed the topic and went straight to the point. End of chapter. Chapter 2151. Chu Fengmian didn't believe that Su Qi had come just to catch up with him. Although Chu Fengmian and Su Qi had only met once, there was no reason for Su Qi to come all the way here alone to catch up. I'm here for the upper sword execution chart. When Su Qi heard Chu Fengmian's words, he didn't waste any more time and went straight to the point. Actually, the Sky-Reaching Pavilion was asked to come by someone. Su Qi added as he finished his sentence. Asked to come by someone? Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed. He knew that Su Qi must have come for the upper sword execution chart, but what he said next was beyond his expectations. The Sky-Reaching Pavilion's origin was extremely mysterious. On the surface, it was just a chamber of commerce, so it naturally wasn't worth much attention. Furthermore, the sky-reaching pavilion didn't occupy any territory or city, so it didn't have much interaction with the martial artists and Yao gods from the outer realm. Therefore, the person who asked the sky-reaching pavilion shouldn't be a force from the outer realm, but a force from the 9 regions. Since the sky-reaching pavilion was asked to talk to Chu Fengmian, it naturally wouldn't be good for them to show up. Moreover, it was very likely that they had a grudge against Chu Fengmian. Oh, let me guess. Is it someone from the 7 great sects, the 6 demonic sects, or the Tianjin sect? Chu Fengmian thought for a moment and smiled. In the 9 regions, only the 7 great sects were Chu Fengmian's enemies and couldn't show up. Among the 7 great sects, only the 6 demonic sects and the Tianjin sect had swordsmanship inheritances and powerful sword cultivators. The other 5 great sects didn't have any powerful sword cultivators qualified to fight for the upper sword sect's swordsmanship inheritance. The upper sword sect's swordsmanship inheritance could only be obtained by extremely powerful sword cultivators. If one wasn't a sword cultivator, even if they obtained the inheritance, they wouldn't be able to comprehend the swordsmanship. Even if they did obtain it, it would be a waste of effort. Chu Fengmian thought for a while. The 6 demonic sects and the Tianjin sect were the only 2 possibilities. Sect Master Chu is right. Su Qi gasped when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. Chu Fengmian had already guessed who it was that had asked the sky-piercing pavilion to discuss the upper sword execution chart with Chu Fengmian. It's the upper sword sect. This time, I'm here to talk to you about the upper sword sect's upper sword execution chart. Su Qi said directly. This time, the sect leader of the upper sword sect has asked us of the sky-reaching pavilion to pay a visit to sect leader Chu. We would like to ask young Master Chu to hand over the upper sword sect's executor's portrait. Of course, there will be a reward for the transfer of the portrait. As for what the reward is, young Master Chu can name it. Although Su Qi said that he was here on behalf of the sky-reaching pavilion, it was more like he had accepted a commission from the sword sect. It had little to do with him, so he was very frank and did not hide anything. Up the sect up. The is to be. Chu Fengmian looked at Su Qi and waved his hand. A Sword Dao sect disciple came over and offered him a cup of tea. Chu Fengmian sipped the tea and said with a smile, "Oh, I don't think the upper sword sect will pay for what I want. Sect Master Chu, please tell me." Su Qi said calmly. He was not in a hurry. He also knew the value of the upper sword execution chart. At the very least, Chu Fengmian's upper sword execution chart had cost the lives of 3 immortal generals. It was a treasure that could make immortal generals go crazy. Su Qi knew how valuable it was. He would be surprised if Chu Fengmian directly handed over the upper sword execution chart. Chu Fengmian's reaction was very normal. The Tianjin sect had asked the sky-reaching pavilion to negotiate with Chu Fengmian. They were prepared to pay a great price. This is a drop of blood essence of the ancient war dragon. The Tianjin sect's sect master gave it to me to pass to you. Su Qi suddenly opened his empty ring and took out a jade bottle. He handed it to Chu Fengmian. Inside the jade bottle was a drop of blood essence with a chaotic color. It was a drop of blood essence from the ancestral sky dragon, the blood essence of an innate divine beast. The upper sword sect had taken out this drop of blood essence during the 9 regions genius battle. It originally belonged to Chu Fengmian. However, Chu Fengmian fought a bloody battle with the demon emperor and completely fell out with the 7 great sects. As a result, Chu Fengmian left. In the end, the primogenitor Tianlong's blood essence and the myriad treasure, heavenly jade talisman, were kept by the Tianjin sect. This time, the Tianjin sect took out this drop of blood essence again and gave it to Chu Fengmian. You want to exchange a drop of primogenitor Tianlong's blood essence for the upper sword execution chart? Chu Fengmian didn't take the jade bottle. Instead, he looked at it with disdain. Although primogenitor Tianlong's blood essence was useful to Chu Fengmian, it wasn't that useful anymore. After all, Chu Fengmian had devoured one of Tianlong's dragon claws. The power it contained was equivalent to tens of thousands of drops of blood essence. Chu Fengmian didn't really care about this drop of blood essence. Sect Master Chu, you misunderstand. This drop of blood essence is just a greeting gift from the Tianjin sect's sect master. Regardless of whether this exchange is successful or not, it's still a gift to Sect Master Chu. Su Qi looked at Chu Fengmian and smiled. Oh, you're quite sincere. Hearing this, Chu Fengmian took the jade bottle. Although this drop of primogenitor Tianlong's blood essence wasn't invaluable, it could easily be exchanged for a few immortal stones. It seemed that this time, the Tianjin sect really wanted the upper sword execution token chart. That was why they didn't hesitate to take out primogenitor Tianlong's blood essence as a greeting gift. It could be said that they wanted to curry favor with Chu Fengmian. After all, the upper sword execution token chart was currently in Chu Fengmian's hands. For the Tianjin sect, if they wanted to obtain the upper sword execution token chart, they would have to negotiate with Chu Fengmian and get him to hand it over voluntarily. As for robbing them by force, the Skysword sect had seen what had happened to the monochrome young lord. After the monochrome young lord's death, they gave up on the idea and went to the sky-piercing pavilion to persuade them. Sect Master Chu, you must have seen the Tianjin sect's sincerity. As for the conditions of the upper sword execution token chart, there's no harm in Sect Master Chu stating them. Su Qi looked at Chu Fengmian and continued. The Tianjin sect is determined to obtain the inheritance of the upper sword execution token chart. At this time, if young Master Chu is willing to give up the upper sword execution token chart, you will certainly receive great benefits. Elder Su, there's no need to beat around the bush. I've already told you the Tianjin sect's conditions. Just say it. There's no need to waste time. Chu Fengmian looked at Su Qi and said with a smile. Chapter 2152. Chu Fengmian had seen through Su Qi's intentions. He should have known about the Tianjin sect's conditions, but Su Qi hadn't explained it clearly. He wanted Chu Fengmian to state his conditions first. If Chu Fengmian's conditions were within the scope of the Tianjin sect's conditions, he could easily agree. As for the rest of the reward, he could keep it for himself. The sky-reaching pavilion only did things for profit. Chu Fengmian was very clear about this. The upper sword execution token chart was related to the inheritance of the upper sword sect. No swordsman would willingly give it up, and Chu Fengmian was no exception. He wanted to create the world's first swordsmanship, control the origin of swordsmanship, and obtain the most ancient swordsmanship of the upper sword sect. Therefore, no matter what the Tianjin sect offered, Chu Fengmian had no intention of giving up the upper sword execution token chart. However, since Su Qi had come today on behalf of the Tianjin sect, Chu Fengmian was somewhat curious. What price was the Tianjin sect willing to pay for the upper sword execution token chart? According to some ancient records, the rise of the Tianjin sect had something to do with the upper sword sect. It was said that the Tianjin sect had obtained part of the upper sword sect's swordsmanship, which ultimately led to the rise of the Tianjin sect. This saying wasn't nonsense. If it was true, it meant that the Tianjin sect had a deeper understanding of the upper sword sect. The greater the price the Tianjin sect was willing to pay for the upper sword execution token chart, the greater the value of the upper sword execution token chart. Chu Fengmian was willing to continue negotiating with Su Qi because he wanted to see how much the Tianjin sect was willing to pay. Since Su Qi had been trying to hide something, Chu Fengmian decided to get straight to the point. Sect Master Chu, you saw through this old man's intentions at a glance. Su Qi smiled when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. He wasn't embarrassed. Everyone knew the sky-reaching pavilion's way of doing things, so it wasn't strange that Chu Fengmian had seen through it. To be honest, the price that the Tianjin sect offered this time is tempting even for me. When Su Qi said this, there was no falsehood in his tone. Even with his status, he was surprised by the Tianjin sect's offer. Chu Fengmian didn't say anything and waited for Su Qi to continue. 1 sword Dao totem, 100 heaven-tier spiritual swords to form a sword array, and 3 immortal-tier spiritual swords. Su Qi said in a deep voice. These are the conditions offered by the Tianjin sect. As for the other things, if Sect Master Chu needs them, we can discuss them further. 1 sword Dao totem, 100 heaven grade spirit swords to form a sword array, and 3 immortal grade spirit swords? Chu Fengmian repeated the 3 conditions in his mind. He couldn't help but be startled. These conditions were too generous. Although the Upper Sword Execution token chart was related to the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect and was priceless, it did not mean that the Upper Sword Execution token chart represented the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect. The Upper Sword Execution map only represented a chance to fight for the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect sword techniques. It was just a chance. There were a total of 12 Upper Sword Execution token charts, and the one in Chu Fengmian's hand was only one of them. If the Tianjin sect was willing to pay such a high price for the Upper Sword Execution token chart, then the Tianjin sect would be willing to pay a price hundreds of times higher than this for the true inheritance of the Upper Sword sect. Chu Fengmian guessed that the Tianjin sect was willing to use the Sky-Reaching Pavilion as a lobbyist. Obviously, the rewards offered were very generous. However, these three conditions still surprised Chu Fengmian. These conditions are just for the Upper Sword Execution token chart. What a generous offer! Not only Chu Fengmian, but also Han Yueli and Luo Shi, who were beside him, were stunned after hearing these conditions. The generous offer offered by the Tianjin sect was also beyond their expectations. The sword array formed by 100 heaven-grade spirit swords was nothing. But there were two other conditions. 3 immortal spirit swords. 3 immortal spirit swords were not as common as cabbages. 4 many forces in the extraterritorial starry sky. Having even one immortal spirit sword was already a big deal. Even some immortal generals who had been famous for a long time only had one immortal artifact at most. Now, the Tianjin sect offered 3 immortal spirit swords. The Tianjin sect foundation is really frightening. The 7 sects of the 9 territories all had frightening foundations. It was even rumored that they were all related to the 9 territories. The fact that the Tianjin sect could casually offer 3 immortal spirit swords showed the strength of the Tianjin sect's foundation. It was no wonder that the 7 sects could still stand tall in the midst of the upheaval of the 9 territories. This was the foundation of a sect. The last sword principal totem was actually the most valuable item among the rewards offered by the Tianjin sect. The sword principal totem was the most precious treasure of the sword principal. Its value was even higher than the supreme sword chi. If all the sword principal totems were added together, they would be even more valuable than the inheritance of the sword sect. Others might not know this, but Chu Fengmian had several sword principal totems in his hands. He knew the value of the sword principal totems very well. In particular, the incomplete swordsmanship hidden in the sword principal totem was related to the origin of the sword principal. The origin of the sword principal, which countless experts of the sword principal yearned for, was recorded in the sword principal totem. Although it was only a sword principal totem, its value was far greater than the 3 immortal spirit swords. The Tianjin sect had put in a lot of effort to get the sword execution token totem. They had actually offered such generous conditions. When this old man heard about this condition, even I was somewhat moved. If it weren't for the fact that our Skyspan Pavilion didn't manage to obtain an Upper Sword Execution token, I'm afraid that our Skyspan Pavilion would have long sold it to the Heavenly Sword sect. Suchi also couldn't help but sigh. He wasn't being hypocritical. This generous condition was unprecedented. It was all for the Sword Execution token totem. It seems that the Heavenly Sword sect is determined to obtain the Upper Sword Enforcer token illustration. Chu Fengmian exclaimed. His face was full of amazement, but in his mind, he was also analyzing the reason why the Tianjin sect was willing to pay such a huge price. Although Chu Fengmian didn't intend to sell the Sword Execution token totem from the very beginning, he could see the value of the Sword Execution token totem from the Tianjin sect's attitude. Since the Tianjin sect was willing to pay such a huge price, the benefits that the Tianjin sect would receive after obtaining the Sword Execution token totem would definitely be much greater than the price they paid. Otherwise, the Tianjin sect would never have done this. In a chapter 2153, Chu Fengmian's understanding of the sword sect was limited to the records in ancient books. Other than that, Chu Fengmian's understanding of the sword sect was even less than that of the sword cultivators in the extraterritorial starry sky. However, The Tianjin sect had a deep understanding of the sword sect. Since the Tianjin sect felt that the upper sword execution token chart was so valuable, Chu Fengmian naturally wouldn't give it up. Moreover, the Tianjin sect was one of the 7 major sects. The Tianjin sect was also involved in the siege of the master of the sword Dao. Chu Fengmian would destroy the 7 major sects sooner or later. If he sold the upper sword execution token chart to the Tianjin sect now, it would increase the strength of the enemy. If the Tianjin sect obtained the inheritance of the upper sword sect, it would be extremely troublesome. The temporary peace between Chu Fengmian and the 7 major sects was also due to the upheaval in the 9 zones. Countless experts from the extraterritorial starry sky were a threat to the 7 major sects. Therefore, the 7 major sects had no time to deal with Chu Fengmian. However, when things calmed down, the 7 major sects would deal with Chu Fengmian first. "What do you think, Sect Master Chu?" Su Qi asked when he saw that Chu Fengmian hadn't spoken. "I won't sell the upper sword execution token diagram. Tell the people of the Sky Sword sect that I won't sell the upper sword execution token diagram unless the Sky Sword sect takes out 5 sword totems." Chu Fengmian looked at Su Qi and said, "This is the only condition. If the Tianjin sect agrees, I'm willing to give the upper sword execution token chart to the Tianjin sect." Su Qi smiled bitterly when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. Chu Fengmian's words were indeed not a direct rejection, but in reality, it was no different from a direct rejection. 5 sword Dao totems. Su Qi knew that the Tianjin sect wouldn't agree. He didn't even need to ask. The upper sword executor token portrait was related to the inheritance of the upper sword sect. It was indeed a priceless treasure. However, a sword Dao totem was also a sword Dao treasure. The value of a sword Dao totem was no less than an upper sword executor token portrait. This time, the Tianjin sect was willing to take out a sword principal totem as a reward for the trade. It could be said that they had put in a lot of effort. But now, Chu Fengmian had asked for 5. This was simply an exorbitant demand. "Sect Master Chu, what's your condition?" Su Qi still wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Chu Fengmian. "Elder Su, this is my only condition. If the Tianjin sect agrees, I am willing to complete the deal. But if they don't agree, then don't blame me." Chu Fengmian said directly. The meaning behind Chu Fengmian's words was clear. Chu Fengmian had no intention of selling the upper sword execution order chart. However, in order to give face to the sky-penetrating pavilion, Chu Fengmian didn't directly refuse. He only proposed a sky-high price. If the Tianjin sect didn't agree to this condition, it had nothing to do with Chu Fengmian. "I'll pass on Sect Master Chu's words to the Tianjin sect right away." Su Qi also understood the meaning behind Chu Fengmian's words. He immediately turned around and prepared to leave. As he left, he still looked a little disappointed. "Elder Su, wait." Just as Su Qi was about to walk out of the Cloud Feather Palace, Chu Fengmian suddenly called out to him. Su Qi stopped when he heard Chu Fengmian's voice. "Is there anything else, Sect Master Chu? I also intend to do business with the sky-penetrating pavilion." Chu Fengmian got straight to the point. "Oh." When the word business was mentioned, Su Qi's eyes lit up. Then, the disappointment on his face disappeared. "What kind of business does Sect Master Chu intend to do with the sky-penetrating pavilion?" "A batch of materials, cultivation methods, elixirs, and so on. I think the sky-penetrating pavilion should be able to offer a fair price." Chu Fengmian's palm moved, and an empty ring appeared in his hand. It flew directly to Su Qi. The empty ring contained the spoils Chu Fengmian had obtained from the empty rings of many powerhouses he had killed. There were a total of 4 experts who had died at Chu Fengmian's hands. The Tianshang Jiandi, the ancestor of Martial Ghost, and the Black and White Lords were the masters of their respective sections. They were the giants of their respective forces and had extremely high statuses. Their empty rings also contained a large number of treasures. Of these treasures, some were useful to Chu Fengmian, and Chu Fengmian had kept them all. However, there were still many materials, cultivation methods, and elixirs that weren't suitable for Chu Fengmian and the Sword Dao sect. In Chu Fengmian's hands, they were meaningless. Since he had met Su Qi today, it was a good opportunity to sell these things to the sky-penetrating pavilion. The sky-penetrating pavilion was one of the largest chambers of commerce in the 9 regions. Although the pile of things in Chu Fengmian's hands was extremely valuable, it wouldn't be a problem for the sky-penetrating pavilion to take them all. It's best if these things are settled in immortal stones. Chu Fengmian threw them into the empty ring and added, "Settled in immortal stones?" Su Qi's expression changed slightly when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. He naturally knew the value of immortal stones. Even for celestial realm experts, one immortal stone was priceless. In the 9 regions, few people who did business with the sky-penetrating pavilion would settle in immortal stones. After all, it was extremely rare for an ordinary transaction to reach the value of dozens of immortal stones. This was after the upheaval of the 9 regions, where countless treasures and immortal stones had appeared. If it had been before the upheaval of the 9 regions, an immortal stone transaction would have been a big business for the sky-penetrating pavilion. Judging from Chu Fengmian's tone, it was obvious that this was definitely a big business deal. However, in Su Qi's opinion, the rise of the Sword Dao sect had only happened recently. They didn't have much of a foundation at all, so how many treasures could they have accumulated? He had some doubts in his heart. However, Su Qi didn't show it. Instead, he directly injected a stream of spiritual power into the empty ring and opened it. This empty ring was an ownerless item. It wasn't engraved with Chu Fengmian's mark, so anyone could open it at will. Su Qi opened the empty ring and looked inside. It was full of treasures, cultivation techniques, materials, sacred pills, spiritual weapons, and so on. It was piled up like a mountain. These treasures were more than the treasures of a sect. However, there was more than one sect that had been destroyed by Chu Fengmian. The 6 sects that had besieged the Sword Dao sect had all been destroyed by Chu Fengmian. Their treasuries had all been taken by Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian had also killed 4 immortal generals. In addition, Kuang Long had just attacked and destroyed the Shengquan sect. The treasures in the Shengquan sect's treasury were also taken by Chu Fengmian. Although some of the treasures were useful to Chu Fengmian and the Sword Dao sect, Chu Fengmian had kept them for himself. However, the remaining treasures were more than 3 times the treasures in the Shengquan sect's treasury. End of chapter. Chapter 2154. Not only were there a lot of treasures, but the quality of the treasures in the ring was also very high. Many of the treasures in the ring were obtained by Chu Fengmian from the 4 immortal generals. The fact that they were kept in the ring by the immortal generals was enough to prove their value. Looking at the mountain of treasures in the empty ring, Su Qi's brows furrowed tightly. The number of treasures in the empty ring far exceeded what he had. With such a large transaction, it would be difficult for him to settle it all by himself. Moreover, there were so many treasures that it would be a huge number of immortal stones. Even Su Qi didn't have so many immortal stones with him. Sect Master Chu, if all of these treasures are settled in immortal stones, I'm afraid our sky-reaching pavilion won't be able to take them out in a short time. Su Qi hesitated for a moment and then said to Chu Fengmian. He did a little calculation. If all the treasures in the ring were exchanged for immortal stones, it would be at least tens of thousands of immortal stones. Although the sky-reaching pavilion was one of the largest chambers of commerce in the 9 regions, it was still too much for them to take out tens of thousands of immortal stones in one go. Hearing Su Qi's words, Chu Fengmian thought for a moment and then said, in addition to immortal stones, if there are any sword techniques or sword manuals, you can also trade them. Chu Fengmian was selling these materials in exchange for immortal stones in order to increase his strength. This time, going to the remains of the Upper Sword sect to compete for the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect would definitely be a fierce battle between wolves and tigers. The 12 Upper Sword execution token diagrams had all appeared. Apart from Chu Fengmian, the masters of the Upper Sword execution token diagrams were all immortal generals. Many of them were even invincible among the immortal generals. Their strength was even more powerful than that of Tian Shangjini. Among the 12 sword cultivators who obtained the Upper Sword execution token portraits, only one could truly obtain the inheritance of the Upper Sword sect. One could imagine how fierce the battle would be. Although Chu Fengmian's strength wasn't inferior to that of ordinary immortal generals, he still had to improve his strength to compete for the inheritance of the Upper Sword Sect. The inheritance of the Upper Sword Sect was very important. If Chu Fengmian wanted to create the world's best sword technique, he had to obtain the Upper Sword Sect's unparalleled sword technique. There was only one chance, so Chu Fengmian had to be fully prepared. The Pavilion of Transcendence had been doing business in the 9 regions for tens of thousands of years. They should have accumulated quite a number of sword techniques and sword manuals. If these sword techniques were all integrated into the 9 region sword arts, they would also be able to increase Chu Fengmian's strength. It would be best if they were rare and eccentric swordsmanship manuals. The grade is not a problem. I want all of them. Chu Fengmian looked at Su Qi and reminded him. For Chu Fengmian, the stranger and rarer the swordsmanship, the more suitable it was for the 9 realms swordsmanship. For example, Chu Fengmian had obtained many ordinary swordsmanships and had integrated them into the 9 realms swordsmanship. These rare and strange swordsmanships were what Chu Fengmian needed. Su Qi was puzzled by Chu Fengmian's request. He thought Chu Fengmian would ask for some powerful sword arts, some high-quality heaven-class immortal arts, or even immortal arts. But now, Chu Fengmian actually asked for those extremely rare and eccentric swordsmanships that were difficult to cultivate. For a moment, he did not understand Chu Fengmian's intention. However, there were indeed many such eccentric swordsmanships in the Pavilion of Transcendence. This was because ordinary sword cultivators would not buy such swordsmanships that were difficult to cultivate. After tens of thousands of years of accumulation, there were indeed many such eccentric and difficult swordsmanships. If Chu Fengmian was willing to ask for them, he was more than happy to do so. Young Master Chu, I need to return to Thousand Merchant City to gather immortal stones. Su Qi looked at Chu Fengmian and said hesitantly, This empty ring, you can take it with you, but I don't have much time. You must come back within a day. Chu Fengmian said with a smile. He also knew the value of the treasures in the empty ring. If Su Qi were to count them alone, it would be impossible for him to do so in a short time. Su Qi wanted to take the empty ring to Thousand Merchant City, which was the headquarters of the Pavilion of Transcendence. Chu Fengmian did not stop him. Chu Fengmian was not worried that Su Qi would take the empty ring for himself. The Pavilion of Transcendence had always valued reputation when doing business. Su Qi was now an important figure in the Pavilion of Transcendence. Naturally, he would not take the empty ring for himself. However, Chu Fengmian could only give Su Qi 1 day. 1.5 days later, the Upper Sword Sect ruins would be opened. Chu Fengmian needed to leave at least half a day in advance to make preparations. Therefore, he only left Su Qi 1 day. Many thanks. Su Qi's face lit up when he saw that Chu Fengmian was so agreeable. He immediately promised Chu Fengmian, I will be back within a day. After saying that, Su Qi turned and left. He turned into a beam of light and hurried back to Thousand Merchant City. As for Chu Fengmian, he quietly stayed in Cloud Feather Palace, comprehending swordsmanship with his eyes closed. Su Qi's speed was extremely fast. After only half a day, 2 beams of light arrived at the edge of the Origin Sword World. One of the beams of light was Su Qi. Chu Fengmian opened the door to the Origin Sword World and brought Su Qi in. However, Su Qi did not come alone this time. He was followed by a white-haired elder. This white-haired elder was incomparably old. No one knew how many years he had lived. At a glance, he seemed to be nearing the end of his life. This was the first impression everyone had when they saw the elder. However, there was a completely different aura on the elder. His aura contained surging vitality that was even stronger than the vitality of a man in his prime. One look at life, and one look at death. Chu Fengmian could tell that the elder cultivated an extremely ancient withered Zen Dao. Although he looked old, once he attacked, the strength that erupted from his body was much stronger than that of many cultivators in their prime. Moreover, the elder's realm was extremely high. So strong. Luo Shi and Han Yueli exclaimed at the same time when they saw the elder. Han Yueli and Luo Shi could only sense the elder's strength, but they could not clearly see the elder's realm. Only Chu Fengyan could tell that the elder was an immortal general expert. He was even a peak immortal general whose strength was not below that of the Black and White Lords. Sky-piercing Pavilion's foundation was indeed profound. There were crouching tigers and hidden dragons. They only had one immortal general expert. Chu Fengyan muttered to himself. If he had only speculated about Sky-piercing Pavilion's foundation before, the elder's appearance now proved everything. Chapter 2155. Sky-reaching Pavilion was indeed mysterious and profound. There were even some extremely powerful existences hidden in it. The major forces in the extraterritorial starry sky would never have thought that a chamber of commerce in the 9 regions would have such a deep foundation. The old man's status was obviously very high in Sky-reaching Pavilion. Even Su Qi, who had joined the Sky-reaching Council, had to be respectful when leading him. As soon as the old man stepped into the cloud feather heavenly palace, a surge of life force emanated from him. Everyone in the cloud feather palace felt as though they were bathed in a spring breeze and were in high spirits. Sect Master Chu, let me introduce you. This is the great elder of Sky-reaching Pavilion. Su Qi came to the front of the throne and introduced him to Chu Fengyan, the great elder. Hearing Su Qi's introduction, Chu Fengyan looked at the old man in surprise. The highest level of the Sky-penetrating Pavilion was the Sky-penetrating Council. The higher the number of elders, the higher their status. The position of the Sky-penetrating Pavilion's great elder was even higher than that of the Sky-penetrating Pavilion's pavilion master. He didn't expect Su Qi to bring the Sky-penetrating Pavilion's great elder with him. With the great elder here, Su Qi didn't have anything to do with this transaction. After introducing the great elder, he stepped back and stood respectfully behind the great elder. I've heard of Sect Master Chu's name for a long time. Today, I finally get to meet you. The great elder looked at Chu Fengyan and said in a very polite tone. He didn't have the arrogance of an immortal general. However, this was also because of the strength that Chu Fengyan had shown. If Chu Fengyan was just an ordinary half-step celestial realm warrior, the great elder wouldn't have been so polite. The reason for his politeness was because of the strength that Chu Fengyan had shown. Now, in the entire 9 regions, no one would treat Chu Fengyan as an ordinary half-step celestial realm warrior. After all, no matter what strength Chu Fengyan had borrowed, he had killed the Black and White Lords, which was enough to establish his prestige. You're welcome, great elder. Please take a seat, Chu Fengyan said with a smile. The 2 Sword Dao sect disciples beside him carried 2 chairs and placed them at the side for the first elder and Su Qi to sit. I didn't expect that the first elder would be alerted this time around. Chu Fengyan took a glance at the great elder and spoke first. The Skyspan Pavilion's grand elder status could be said to be one of the highest in the Skyspan Pavilion. His status was transcendent, and when the Skyspan Pavilion did business, there was no need for the elders of the Skyspan Assembly to step in. The reason why Su Qi came to talk to Chu Fengyan about the Sword Execution Order map was because it was entrusted by the Tianjin sect, especially by the Tianjin sect leader. The Tianjin sect was one of the 9 zones' 7 great sects. Even the Sky-reaching Pavilion dared to slight them. However, the only one who had come was Su Qi, a newly promoted elder of the Skyspan Council. This time, the first elder had suddenly arrived. Su Qi's status was nothing in front of the first elder. This made Chu Fengyan somewhat curious about the Sky-penetrating Pavilion's actions. Could it be that the first elder is also here for the Sword Execution Order map? Chu Fengyan's eyes flickered as he looked at the first elder and asked tentatively. The Sword Execution Order map had great implications. Given the Sky-reaching Pavilion's standing and usual style of conduct, they would never take the initiative to seize it or interfere. However, if the benefits were great enough, anything was possible. The first elder's strength wasn't inferior to the monochrome young master's. Moreover, his path of wither meditation was even more mysterious than the monochrome young master's swordsmanship. Chu Fengyan's eyes were incomparably cautious as he watched the first elder's every move, ready to make a move at any time. Sect Master Chu, you don't have to be so cautious. I've already informed the Sky Sword sect of your answer regarding the upper sword execution order diagram. This matter no longer has anything to do with our sky-reaching pavilion. The first elder understood the meaning behind Chu Fumian's words and smiled. This time, I've only come to make a deal with sect leader Chu. Chu Fumian relaxed a little when he heard the first elder's words. Given the first elder's status, he wouldn't lie to Chu Fumian at such a time. Moreover, this was the origin sword world. With the help of the origin energy of the sword origin world, Chu Fumian was confident that even if a profound heaven realm immortal marquis were to come, he wouldn't be able to defeat him. In the origin sword world, even a profound heaven realm immortal marquis wouldn't be able to gain the slightest advantage over Chu Fumian. Although the first elder's strength was unfathomable, Chu Fumian could see that he hadn't stepped into the immortal marquis realm yet. We've already counted the items that sect leader Chu gave us. If converted to immortal stones, they're worth a total of 45,000 immortal stones. The first elder waved his hand, and a list appeared in his hand. It flew to Chu Fumian. Chu Fumian glanced at the list. It recorded the value of each treasure in the spatial ring. The value of each treasure in the spatial ring was densely listed on the list. Chu Fumian casually glanced at a few of them. They were all very fair, so he counted them and put them away. All right, we'll go with this price. Chu Fumian nodded. However, sect leader Chu has said that the price can be offset by sword manuals and sword arts. This old man has also brought a batch of sword arts. Please take a look. The first elder waved his hand, and another spatial ring appeared. It flew to Chu Fumian. Chu Fengmian opened the spatial ring. Inside the spatial ring were countless sword techniques, sword manuals, and recorded media. They were all different. There were books made of paper, beast skin, and even some books made of metal. Many of these sword arts and sword manuals have been passed down from an incomparably ancient era. It wasn't uncommon for some sects to use metal manuals or spiritual jades to record their martial arts and cultivation techniques for thousands of years to pass down. Chu Fumian was already used to it. With a thought, hundreds of sword arts and sword manuals were flipped open. Chu Fumian read 10 lines at a glance. With his current understanding of sword principles, he could see the mysteries of ordinary sword arts with just a few glances. He could even read hundreds of sword arts and sword manuals in one breath. Even so, Chu Fumian spent a full 10 minutes to roughly read through the sword manuals and sword arts in the spatial ring. After all, there were more than 10,000 sword manuals and sword arts in the spatial ring. Moreover, there were some extremely high-level sword arts. It wasn't easy for Chu Fumian to comprehend them. Of course, this was just a rough look. It would take a long time to completely comprehend them. End of chapter. Chapter 2156. Most of them were obscure, complicated, and unorthodox swordsmanship. These swordsmanship were not popular in the 9 regions. For example, there were very few such sword arts in the Sword Dao sect's library. Chu Fumian had never heard of many of them, so they could be integrated into the 9 regions' sword arts. I'll buy all the sword arts and sword manuals in the empty ring. How many immortal stones will it cost? Chu Fumian looked at all the sword arts and came back to his senses. He closed the empty ring and asked the first elder directly. Sect Master Chu needs all these sword arts? The first elder was surprised to hear Chu Fumian's words. He thought Chu Fumian just wanted to find a few rare sword arts to comprehend the Sword Dao. He did not expect Chu Fumian to buy all the sword arts in one go. A sword cultivator would cultivate at most 10 sword arts in his life. The more sword arts he cultivated, the more distracted he would be. Biting off more than one could chew was a fatal flaw, not only for sword cultivators, but also for any warrior. For example, some powerful warriors and demon gods only cultivated a few immortal martial arts and immortal arts. It was impossible for them to comprehend a large number of immortal martial arts and immortal arts in one go, biting off more than one could chew. The first elder brought so many sword arts and sword manuals for Chu Fumian to choose from. The Sword Dao sect had been in the 9 regions for tens of thousands of years. The number of sword arts and sword manuals collected was astronomical. These sword arts and sword manuals were selected according to Chu Fengmian's wishes. They were rare, difficult to cultivate, and unique sword arts. There were more than 10,000 of them. Chu Fengmian wanted to buy all of them in one go, which was beyond the first elder's expectations. However, the first elder had dealt with countless businesses. After a short moment of surprise, he quickly reacted and said to Chu Fengmian, "If you buy all of these sword arts, it will cost a total of 10,000 immortal stones." The value of these 10,000 plus sword techniques varied. Some sword techniques were of extremely high quality, and they were worth a few tens of immortal stones, or even over 100 immortal stones. On the other hand, some sword techniques were of low quality and were difficult to cultivate, so they couldn't be sold for a good price at all. On average, it was about 1 immortal stone for one sword art. "All right, I'll buy all of them." Chu Fengmian didn't bargain with the Great Elder. The items he sold were worth a total of 45,000 immortal stones. Even if he used these sword arts, Chu Fengmian could still get 35,000 immortal stones. Actually, these sword techniques might not be worth 10,000 immortal stones to other sword cultivators because there was utterly no sword cultivator that would be willing to purchase so many sword techniques in one go and would only choose a few amongst them. However, for Chu Fengmian, if he could comprehend all of the 10,000 sword principles and integrate them into the 9-region sword principle, the increase in his strength would definitely be much greater than the increase in his strength by swallowing and refining the 10,000 immortal stones. Especially now, there was only one day left before Chu Fengmian went to the ruins of the Shang sword sect to compete for the inheritance. Within this day, Chu Fengmian had to improve his strength as much as possible. These 10,000 swordsmanship manuals were exactly what Chu Fengmian needed. Therefore, Chu Fengmian did not bargain and simply bought them all. Sect Master Chu is forthright. Seeing Chu Fengmian agree so readily, the Great Elder exclaimed in surprise. A transaction of 10,000 immortal stones was extremely rare in the sky-piercing pavilion. At the very least, the elders of the sky-piercing pavilion had to be present to finalize such a transaction. Furthermore, a transaction of this level would normally require several days of discussion, or even longer. It was indeed extremely rare for someone to agree so readily like Chu Fengmian. This is the sky-piercing pavilion's sky golden token. In the future, Sect Master Chu will be an esteemed guest of the sky-piercing pavilion. As long as you wish to make a transaction with the sky-piercing pavilion, the elders of the sky-piercing pavilion will come and make the transaction with you. The Great Elder took out a golden token and handed it to Chu Fengmian. The two words sky-piercing were engraved on the token. The two words were extremely charming and emitted a ray of light that shot straight to the 9 heavens, as if it really had the power to reach the heavens. Those two words had definitely been written by an extremely powerful existence. Chu Fengmian could even sense the aura of the expert who had written those two words back then. The aura of the profound heaven realm. The person who wrote the two words on the token must be an immortal marquis at the very least. Chu Fengmian exclaimed in his heart. The spiritual power of the two words, heaven-piercing, on the token hadn't dissipated yet. This proved that this token had been refined recently. It wasn't something that had been left behind from ancient times. The person who wrote the two words was definitely a profound heaven realm expert. At the very least, their strength was far above the Great Elders. The sky-piercing pavilion actually has such an expert. They actually have a profound heaven realm expert. Chu Fengmian was astonished. When he first met the Great Elder, he thought that the Great Elder was already one of the strongest people in the sky-piercing pavilion. But now, it seemed that there was always a sky beyond the sky and a person stronger than the Great Elder in the sky-piercing pavilion. The foundation of the sky-piercing pavilion was indeed not inferior to the 7 great sections. Chu Fengmian had to be incomparably cautious. Many thanks, Great Elder. Chu Fengmian didn't stand on ceremony and accepted the golden token. Since the sky-piercing pavilion had such a foundation and the Great Elder had personally come today with the intention of befriending Chu Fengmian also went with the flow and befriended the sky-piercing pavilion. The major factions of the 9 regions and the 7 great sects were definitely Chu Fengmian's mortal enemies. Chu Fengmian and the 7 great sects would fight sooner or later, but because of the upheaval in the 9 regions and the arrival of countless experts from outer space, the battle had been delayed. But in the near future, Chu Fengmian would definitely fight the 7 great sections. Moreover, Chu Fengmian also wanted a rope in the various factions. He was willing to become the Dragon Lord of the Blue Dragon sect because he wanted a rope in the Blue Dragon sect. However, compared to the 7 great sects, a faction like the Blue Dragon sect was still too small. Whether it was strength or foundation, it was far inferior. However, the Sky-Piercing Pavilion was different. The foundation of the Sky-Piercing Pavilion was definitely not inferior to any of the 7 great sections. If Chu Fengmian could rope in the Sky-Piercing Pavilion, it would be much easier for him to deal with the 7 great sections. Of course, Chu Fengmian also knew that a faction like the Sky-Piercing Pavilion wouldn't be easy to rope in. The Sky-Piercing Pavilion was even older than the 7 great sects and had always maintained a neutral position. That was why the Sky-Piercing Pavilion had always been able to survive and prosper in the 9 regions. End of chapter. Chapter 2157. It was extremely difficult to rope in the Sky-Reaching Pavilion, but by befriending them, Chu Fengmian could also ask them for help in the future. After all, the Sky-Reaching Pavilion had always done things for profit. If Chu Fengmian could afford it, the Sky-Reaching Pavilion could also do things for him. Now that he was on good terms with the Sky-Reaching Pavilion, there was nothing to gain, so he immediately took the token. In my opinion, Sect Master Chu needs so many immortal stones because you want to use them to enter the celestial realm. Seeing Chu Fengmian take the token, the first elder looked at Chu Fengmian and suddenly said, "Yes, I need a lot of immortal power to enter the celestial realm. If the Sky-Reaching Pavilion has a lot of immortal stones, I'm willing to exchange a lot of treasures." Chu Fengmian didn't hide and said directly. Almost any celestial realm expert could see that Chu Fengmian needed so much immortal stones. Chu Fengmian definitely wanted to step into the celestial realm, which was why he needed so many immortal stones. If these 35,000 immortal stones were given to an ordinary half-step celestial realm expert, they would probably be able to break through 100 times, but for Chu Fengmian, it was still a drop in the bucket. The immortal power Chu Fengmian needed was at least more than 1,000,000 immortal stones. Even though Chu Fengmian had killed and devoured the blood essence of the 3 immortal generals, Tianshang Jindi, Black and White Lords, he still needed at least 800,000 to 900,000 immortal stones to accumulate enough strength to break through to the celestial realm. The Great Tribulation of the celestial realm was extremely dangerous for Chu Fengmian. As a mutant of heaven and earth, he was not tolerated by heaven and earth. Once he wanted to transcend the Great Tribulation of the celestial realm, he would definitely be blocked by the heavenly Tao. Therefore, Chu Fengmian had to accumulate strength to the limit and have complete confidence before he chose to transcend the Great Tribulation of the celestial realm. If Chu Fengmian wanted to transcend the Great Tribulation of the celestial realm, it was thousands or tens of thousands of times more difficult than ordinary martial artists or demon gods. In addition, Chu Fengmian was still far away from the Great Tribulation of the celestial realm. Therefore, Chu Fengmian's heart stirred when he heard the first elder's words. If Sky-Reaching Pavilion really did have a large amount of immortal stones, then Chu Fengmian could use a large amount of treasures to exchange for them. For example, Chu Fengmian still had the 7 Knights sword, an immortal weapon, countless ancient sacred pills, and even the Life Grand Seal. They were all priceless treasures that Chu Fengmian could exchange for a large number of immortal stones. However, even the most famous merchant guilds might not be able to take out so many immortal stones. The number of immortal stones Chu Fengmian needed was simply an astronomical figure. Stepping into the celestial realm was a crucial step for Chu Fengmian. No matter how difficult it was, Chu Fengmian had to accumulate strength and attack the celestial tribulation. Chu Fengmian had obtained countless opportunities in the past, and what he was showing now was just a drop in the ocean. Only when Chu Fengyan stepped into the celestial realm would all of this truly erupt. At that time, Chu Fengyan's strength would have soared more than 100 times. Only by stepping into the celestial realm would Chu Fengyan be considered a true powerhouse, and he would have truly taken revenge on the 7 great sections. The foundation of the sky-reaching pavilion today was beyond Chu Fengyan's imagination. He was also looking forward to whether he could buy a large number of immortal stones from the sky-reaching pavilion. Even if he couldn't accumulate enough to directly attack the celestial tribulation, a large number of immortal stones could still improve his strength. However, the first elders answered disappointed Chu Fengyan. Our sky-reaching pavilion can't take out a large number of immortal stones. Although many treasures have appeared after the upheaval of the 9 regions, immortal stones are a hard currency. Almost all of them are in the hands of celestial realm experts. There are not many who are willing to sell to us. The first elder shook his head and said, for celestial realm martial artists and Yao gods, immortal stones were hard currency and also what they needed the most. Even though the sky-reaching pavilion had been purchasing immortal stones in large quantities in the 9 regions, they didn't buy much. This time, they directly sold 35,000 immortal stones to Chu Fengyan, sweeping away all the immortal stones that the sky-reaching pavilion had accumulated. However, our sky-reaching pavilion has suddenly received several immortal pills in the past 2 days. I wonder if you're interested, Sect Master Chu? Just as Chu Fengyan was feeling a little disappointed, the first elder suddenly changed the topic. Immortal pills? Are they really immortal pills? Chu Fengyan's eyes flashed as he looked at the first elder. There was some disbelief in his voice. Immortal pills were pills refined from immortal herbs, and their medicinal efficacy was countless times stronger than that of ancient sacred pills. Moreover, the energy contained in immortal pills was pure immortal energy. Ordinary immortal pills weren't something that even celestial realm martial artists were qualified to enjoy. Only profound heaven realm experts were truly qualified to enjoy immortal pills. The price of an immortal pill was no less than that of an immortal weapon. In this era, even immortal herbs were extremely rare, let alone immortal pills refined from immortal herbs. Now that the first elder said that the sky-reaching pavilion had immortal pills, Chu Fengyan was a little skeptical. However, Chu Fengyan also knew that the first elder wasn't someone who would speak without thinking. Chu Fengyan continued to ask, what kind of immortal pill is it? What's the price? Immortal pills were pills refined from immortal herbs. They contained incomparably pure, immortal energy. No matter what kind of immortal pill it was, even if it was used for healing, the immortal energy contained within would be extremely useful for increasing Chu Fengyan's strength. If the sky-reaching pavilion really did have immortal pills, then Chu Fengyan would buy them no matter how high the price was. This immortal pill is called the Huaqing Immortal Pill. It's a type of immortal pill used for cultivation. The price of each pill is 1,000 immortal stones. The first elder raised his hand, and a jade bottle appeared in his palm. It contained the azure-colored pill. Huaqing Immortal Pill, 1,000 immortal stones for 1 pill. Chu Fengyan was extremely shocked when he heard the first elder's words. He wasn't shocked by the immortal pill, but by the price. The price of an immortal pill wasn't inferior to an ordinary immortal weapon. If converted to spirit stones, it would be worth at least several thousand spirit stones, or even 10,000 spirit stones. Yet, the price that the first elder said was only 1,000 immortal stones. It was merely 1/10 of the price of an ordinary immortal pill. Even an immortal pill that had lost a large amount of its medicinal strength and only had 30 to 40% of its medicinal strength left wouldn't be able to sell for such a price. However, Chu Fengyan's gaze suddenly turned to the jade bottle. The azure-colored immortal pill contained within the jade bottle had a cyan luster on its surface that caused Chu Fengyan to feel somewhat uncomfortable. It was as if the cyan luster was something that was added to the immortal pill and not the original color of the Huaqing Immortal Pill. Could you open the jade bottle and have a look? Chu Fengyan looked to the first elder and asked. The jade bottle isolated his immortal energy. Thus, Chu Fengmian was unable to determine the origin of the immortal pill and whether it was real or fake. Chapter 2158. Furthermore, Chu Fengmian instinctively felt that there was something strange about the immortal pellet. Sect Master Chu, please be careful. Hearing Chu Fengmian's warning, the great elder carefully opened the jade bottle. Immediately, a cyan blue miasma was emitted from the bottle. This caused Chu Fengmian to frown. The cyan blue miasma was enveloped by the great elder's spiritual power, preventing it from being emitted. However, Chu Fengmian was able to clearly sense that the cyan blue miasma was an extremely poisonous gas. After opening the jade bottle, Chu Fengmian was able to clearly see that the immortal pellet was covered with countless amounts of extremely poisonous gas. That was the reason why the immortal pellet had such a cyan blue color. Great Elder, could this immortal pellet be a poisonous pellet? Chu Fengmian asked with an ice-cold expression. The immortal pellet simply did not resemble an immortal pellet at all. It was simply a poisonous pellet. The extremely poisonous gas on the immortal pellet was so strong that even Chu Fengmian felt a sense of danger. It was no wonder the Great Elder was able to offer such a cheap price. The Huaqing immortal pellet was covered with extremely poisonous gas. It could be said that if one were to come into contact with the Huaqing immortal pellet in the slightest, one would be met with a calamity. Unless one were to completely neutralize all of the poison on the Huaqing immortal pellet, no one would dare to ingest and refine it. It was also no wonder that the Skyspan Pavilion would sell all of their immortal pellets. To the Skyspan Pavilion, the Huaqing immortal pellet was simply a hot potato. Although they knew that it was an actual immortal pellet, they were simply unable to ingest it. They could only look at it. This was especially true for the extremely poisonous gas within the Huaqing immortal pellet. Even immortal general-level experts would be incomparably fatal. When the Great Elder took out the Huaqing immortal pellet, he enveloped it with his spiritual power so that the Huaqing immortal pellet would not emit even the slightest bit of poison. Sect Master Chu, you must be joking. This Huaqing immortal pellet is indeed an actual immortal pellet. Furthermore, after being appraised by our Skyspan Pavilion, we have determined that the medicinal energy contained within this Huaqing immortal pellet has not been damaged in the slightest. Its medicinal energy contained within its medicinal energy. The Great Elder was able to hear the ridicule in Chu Fengmian's words. I also know that the poison on the Huaqing immortal pill is extremely difficult to deal with. The true value of the Huaqing immortal pill is at least 10,000 immortal stones in exchange for one Huaqing immortal pill. However, our sky-reaching pavilion has no way to neutralize the poison in the Huaqing immortal pill. That's why we're selling it at such a low price. At this point, the Great Elder's voice suddenly stopped, and he spoke again. Others do not possess the means to neutralize the Huaqing immortal pellet's poison. However, for Sect Master Chu, who possesses the bloodline of the heaven-devouring beast, it should not be impossible for him to do so. Oh, this time, it was Chu Fengmian's turn to be shocked. The Great Elder had actually pointed out the existence of the heaven-devouring beast bloodline in Chu Fengmian's body. Although Chu Fengmian did not deliberately hide his heaven-devouring bloodline when he fought, there were very few experts who truly recognized the heaven-devouring beast. The first elder had actually pointed out Chu Fengmian's heaven-devouring beast bloodline. In that case, he had indeed come prepared. That said, it was indeed as the Great Elder had said. While it was true that others would not be able to neutralize the Huaqing immortal pill's poison, Chu Fengmian was different. He possessed the bloodline of the heaven-devouring beast and possessed the power to devour the heavens. Although the Huaqing immortal pill's poison was very powerful, it was not impossible for Chu Fengmian to completely neutralize and devour it. Furthermore, the Huaqing immortal pill contained 100% of its medicinal energy. This proved that the medicinal energy of the Huaqing immortal pill had not diminished in the slightest over the years. Such an immortal pill was much more effective than the immortal pills that had lost their medicinal energy. The Sky-Reaching Pavilion's information network is very powerful. You know quite a lot. Chu Fengmian said calmly. Chu Fengmian said calmly. It was hard to tell whether his tone was sarcasm or praise. Apart from trading treasures, our sky-reaching pavilion is also engaged in the information business. If Sect Master Chu requires any information, you can come and find us. Our sky-reaching pavilion will always welcome an esteemed guest like Sect Master Chu. The Great Elder said with a smile. Our sky-reaching pavilion has a total of 7 Huaqing immortal pills. If Sect Master Chu needs them, our sky-reaching pavilion is willing to sell all 7 to Sect Master Chu. 7 Huaqing immortal pills, a total of 5,000 immortal stones. I'll take them at that price. Chu Fengmian thought for a moment and said coldly. Although the Huaqing immortal pill's poison was very powerful, Chu Fengmian could slowly neutralize it with his heaven-devouring power. However, 1,000 immortal stones for a single Huaqing immortal pill was a little too expensive. The Huaqing immortal pill was indeed somewhat useful in Chu Fengmian's hands. However, if it was in the hands of any other cultivator or Yao immortal, or even a profound heaven realm expert, it would be no different from trash. If the poison on the Huaqing immortal pill wasn't completely neutralized, it would be no different from courting death if it was devoured rashly. It could be said that other than Chu Fengmian, it was impossible for the sky-reaching pavilion to sell the Huaqing immortal pill. Although Chu Fengmian had a lot of immortal stones in his possession, he had accumulated them bit by bit. Naturally, he would not be a fool. A total of 5,000 immortal stones and 7 Huaqing immortal pills was Chu Fengmian's bottom line. Sect Master Chu, the Huaqing immortal pill is an immortal pill with full medicinal strength. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, the first elder said with a frown. He naturally knew that the Huaqing immortal pill was of little value. Although it was extremely valuable and truly an immortal pill with full medicinal strength, it was impossible to consume due to the poison on it. One could only look at it. The sky-reaching pavilion had only obtained the 7 Huaqing immortal pills by chance. The various experts of the sky-reaching pavilion had used countless methods to neutralize the poison on the Huaqing immortal pills, but to no avail. In the end, they could only choose to give up and sell them. Although Chu Fengmian's price was not much, it was still a total of 2,000 immortal stones. One must know that 2,000 immortal stones was a huge transaction even for the sky-reaching pavilion. Chu Fengmian's price had put him in a dilemma. These Huaqing immortal pills are contaminated with poison. They are already trash. Even though I possess the bloodline of the heaven-devouring beast, it will be extremely difficult to refine them. 5,000 immortal stones is my bottom line. Chu Fengmian stared at the first elder and said resolutely, apart from me, no one else will be willing to purchase these Huaqing immortal pills. To the sky-reaching pavilion, 5,000 immortal stones is already a windfall that came out of nowhere. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, the first elder felt extremely helpless. He also knew that he had to accept Chu Fengmian's price. It was as Chu Fengmian had said. If Chu Fengmian did not purchase the Huaqing immortal pills, there would not be anyone in the entire 9 regions who would purchase them. End of chapter. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.